We're going to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask Rachel to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we'll begin the meeting with comments from the public on items not on the agenda tonight. Any comments from the public? Hearing none. Any comments from board members or acknowledgements by board members before we get into the meat of tonight's meeting?
I wanted to say that the celebration of learning at EES was a fabulous event, and I wish more people could have gone, but at the same time, the number there, it was wonderful to be able to have that interaction with Mr. Picard, and everybody in the specials, and to get a really good understanding of what the curriculum was. So I thought that was a fabulous event.
Great. Anyone else?
Two of us went to the Vermont School Board Association meeting over the tail end of last week. What I was especially pleased to see was that former Superintendent Ray Prue in this district received the 2003 Stafford Bell Award. He served this district, as I remember, for about 10 years, but he has also been heavily involved with miscellaneous to many things educationally statewide.
It was a very nice tribute.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree.
A number of us attended the conference, some for all of it, some for portions of it, and it was well worth it, inspiring, great keynote speakers, great presentations by students. My quick takeaway was Thursday was about inspiration, Friday was about how we're going to fund it. Thursday was much more interesting, Friday was a little more depressing.
Friday was come back down to
So maybe when we get to the end, for future agenda items, if there's anything that pops for any of us who were there that we want to either look into further or share among us for sort of takeaways and things that, if there's anything that prompts action ideas for us.
Yeah. Great. Do you have anything?
No.
I just want to thank board members for Calendar 2.0. Mark and I traveled to Montpelier last week to participate in a policy governance networking session, and that is as exciting as it sounds. We also, all of us attended the roundtable last week that was held in conjunction with the PTO. Really a great session, and thanks to everyone who participated and made that a very productive meeting. And then also thanks to the board members who were able to participate in the annual Vermont School Boards Association conference. As always, it was that combination of thinking big and then trying to figure out how to make it all work. I was talking to one of the board members. The keynote that kicked it off was Diane Ravitch, the author of this book. She used to be an ardent supporter of standardized tests and has had a change of heart. And I was joking with, maybe it was Kim or somebody else, I said, handing all the members of Vermont school boards a copy of this book is like handing them Molotov cocktails. Very intriguing read, as you can imagine, and certainly timely. In terms of standardized tests, the oncoming Common Core, and all the parts and pieces that come with it. So thank you, board members, for your active involvement in our work over these last couple of weeks. And so with that, unless there's anything else, we'll kick it off with the consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. So the meat of our, the other thing I need to say, and it's a mea culpa. With all the excitement at our last meeting, I neglected to assign 3.2 to a board member. So we did not have a monitoring report on policy 3.2.
I am off the hook for one more month.
And and just so you know,
Mountain spades.
that's right. That's right. So I apologize very much for neglecting to assign that. I would have done it myself, but today was crazy. So we'll get to that next meeting. So we'll table that, and that gives us lots more time to talk about the main event. We're going to hear tonight a monitoring report of sorts, an update on two issues that have come up in front of this board in one way or another over these last few months, and that is the foreign language program in the middle school, and also music program and music participation, something that we talked about a lot or off and on last year, and we're revisiting this year now that we've got some new data in hand. And then after that, we will get into, we will pick back up our monitoring report on the ends. Last week, we had a very good presentation, a very full written report as well that tried to complement, the presentation tried to complement the written report. And we will pick up where we left off, and our goal tonight is to get through any additional questions board members may have about the interpretation and the evidence, and possible adoption by the end of this evening. I would ask board members to help me stay on track with our time tonight, and so while we want to leave lots of time for conversation and questions, I just want to be mindful of everyone's time and our goal of ending this meeting at 9 o'clock. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Brennan. So 2.8, as the board knows, is about me keeping you in support, supporting you through good communication. I'm remiss in not having taken more time back in August to more fully explain the decision that was made at the middle school to change the way we deliver foreign language instruction to kids in grades 7 and 8. And we've talked about that, and it just felt like it was timely to invite my colleagues from the middle school to give you a little bit more of a backstory that you haven't had a chance heretofore to engage in. The decision has been made, but this is really just an update on where that decision came from. It's sort of its genesis, why it was made, and what's underway this year, thanks to the good work, leadership of Kevin, but most especially the good teaching of Betsy Conlon and Jess Finley, who are here as a Spanish teacher and as a teacher of French. So thanks for joining us. And you have 60 minutes if you need it all, because we just netted 20.
And will it be a bilingual presentation?
Yeah,
trilingual.
I'll take care of the English section. Even that might be a question. No, so the decision, we joke 60 minutes. I probably lost way more than 60 minutes of sleep during the summer while this was coming about. And you could almost see it happening. We often work with the high school so that we can create a full-time position between us and the high school. That's how it's always been. This past summer, it was posted, and there really wasn't anybody that was coming up. There was just nobody out there. The high school interviewed and found someone, and they fell in love with her, and we were going to jump on board and pick her up for that. As we had I think this is my third person in my 5 or 6 years being here, so it's a constant turnover. Anyways, this was on a Thursday, and Friday, 2 Fridays before we were to start school, she decided she wasn't going to take the position. We looked at the applicants that were left. There was one that lived in Peru, as in the country. There was one that lived in Madrid, Spain, and there was one that's non-certified. Those are the only 3 other applicants. I guess we left it out there about a week in hopes that somebody else would apply, and nobody else applied. And so I emailed Betsy and Jess to come on in to look at what our options might be, knowing that if we were to keep it the way it was, which was every day in 7th grade, every day in 8th grade, that we would be looking at classroom sizes that would just be obnoxious. I can't even imagine how that would look physically, systems-wise. I mean, we would have to host it in like the cafeteria. I mean, that would be really the only viable thing. So we sat down and we decided, okay, let's look at some of our options. And really it was that, or look at doing something a little bit different, which was to offer 7th grade. 8th grade we left it the same because 8th graders had already been having it. We knew with the numbers, it's a smaller class size, that we could actually host it as it is, where Jess would and Betsy would be able to kind of take those students in. As it is, Jess, your class size for 8th grade?
Both have 31.
They're 31. It's a large class for us. In 7th grade, with the class size being a bit larger, we decided to look at it as a blue-white thing, where they would have French or Spanish every other day, and every other day they would have phys ed. Was it the optimal? No, it's a huge change for us. In talking about it, as it was, it's a Spanish 1 class or a French 1 class that you could get not credit at the high school, but you could at least be able to take French or Spanish 2 if you successfully made it through here. And as it was in the past, we were doing that over a course of 2 years. So we decided, well, let's look at it and see if we can do it in a year and a half, in 90 extra days, or from the 180, so 270 days, can we provide a French 1 or Spanish 1 program? Knowing that things were going to change with the way it's presented and the way it feels, it was really up to these guys to kind of make that work. So I was hoping that they could share a little bit about their thinking and how it might look a little different this year.
Kevin, I think
sorry.
I understood you to say that also the decision at the high school, they could not, they
Oh,
also
sorry.
could not find a Spanish teacher.
Yeah, they didn't find a Spanish
So
teacher as
that
well,
they've-
and they actually just absorbed their class, so their class sizes are a little larger for their.
So they
For
had the
the
same
program.
conversation and just came to a different.
They came
Different
to the, actually
decision.
they came to the same decision, which was we're just going to absorb it,
Okay.
but they offered it differently, and they also offer more languages, so it's a little bit least intrusive, I guess.
And they needed less of a position this year, right? So it wouldn't have been, they needed a .125, a .128.
Whatever the
for
number
one
was.
class,
Yep.
instead of more of a position, which it had been in the past. So it wasn't quite equal to what the past 2 people had accepted. It was a little bit less. That might have been part of that.
The other point that I've come to understand or feature of your instructional schedule is that decisions have to be made before the first day of school, and that it's a jigsaw puzzle, and if you didn't have this piece fit in, it would affect the entire program. So you had to make a commitment, and it's hard to change. You can't change once you make the commitment, because the constellation of everything else revolves around, it's all interdependent. I don't know if I said that correctly, but you can't just willy-nilly go about it. It's all has to fit together day one. So Jessica and Betsy are here really to talk about sort of what the scope and sequence is, sort of in general terms, what you try to accomplish in 2 years, now less than 90 days, the way I understand it, and what you've thought about in terms of, as 2 teachers of foreign languages, how do you address that content in a way that's still engaging and with confidence that kids are going to enter at the other end in 8th grade ready for a Spanish 2 or French 2 experience, knowing that this is all sort of new to you, very new to you.
Well, I wrote down 3 words the other day after our meeting. The teacher I am this year is not the teacher I was last year. The teacher I was 40 years ago is I'm a different person. Every year, it's a new story, it's a new page. My students are, new to me too, even though I've had them in 6th grade, or some of them in 6th grade. So every year when I start the year, I have to evaluate the material that I'm teaching, update the material I'm teaching, and I want to modify the material I'm teaching. And this year, having the students every other day, it's made me think a lot on the way home, on the way to school, about different ways of doing things and trying to make sure that they're getting the material that they need. But I have to say, it can be tricky. And I'm still not used to the every other day piece, because today, after I finished working today, I put all my things away and I went, oh, right, I got to do it again tomorrow. Okay, I'll take it all back. And I'll do it, because I have to do the same thing. So I looked back to see where I was last year about this time with my students, and I'm not too far behind where I was. I do know that this year in 7th grade, I do love to do the bûche de Noël, which is the traditional French cake and I do a Rachel Ray thing, so I make the bish because it's so much easier for me to make the bish. And then I divide it up and we have a little raffle, and it's a 2-day event. But I've decided this year with the every other day, maybe the biche de Noël, as part of what we do is instead of 2 days, it's going to take me almost a week. And that's a busy time of year anyway. So there'll be some things I may have to take out. I may have to rethink those things. The 8th graders and I we have a food unit, so I thought, well, maybe I'll plug in food in the 8th grade curriculum, and it's not the end of the world. It was a fun event. If I don't have to make it this year, it's okay. But certain things I'm going to have to really think about, and that's to modify and evaluate. Is this really, do I really need to work on this? Because I have the students every other day, and I still want to move them on, so that in 7th grade, what my plan is that when they leave at the end of 7th grade, we'll have done chapters 1, 2, and 3 from the text, even though I don't really use the textbook. They don't have a book. And in 8th grade, when we'll have them every day, we'll finish the other the other material. I'm sorry I've taken too much time. That's, yes.
I was just going to ask, when you say 1, 2, and 3, like how many units are there?
Well, we only did part of the book anyway, and I was only supposed to do up to chapter 10. And in chapter 10, it was just to teach passé composé, the past tense. The high school teachers at the meeting this summer said, don't even worry about passé composé. So I said, I don't really do a lot with passé composé. I just give them a taste. And they said, fine. So I think we talked about, you take about 6 weeks for every chapter. And I think that's probably what we take is 6 weeks. We like to
6 weeks when it's every day.
When it's every day, so we may have to take a little bit more time.
Yeah, and we had talked about the high school adopted a new book that between the two of us, we use the book as a guide, not as a verbatim. We don't reference the book every single day. It's not our style, but we definitely take it as a guide. And they got a new book, and when we stayed with our old units, we took some of the stuff that they got or that they needed for us to teach to be able to be ready for level 2. But we didn't completely change our curriculum. And now with this, we're kind of looking and saying, okay, well, in the level 1 book at the high school for Spanish, there's no medical in there yet. So I can actually completely pull that unit. I have to get the grammar in other units somewhere, but the vocabulary, I can take that out. So that frees up 6 weeks-ish. So I kind of have to look at it like that. And then a lot of the deeper cultural things that I would spend time on, I'm going to have to kind of narrow so that they're still ready for the level 2, and so there's not a community, because there won't be as many kids ready for 2 if we stay this way. But if we do hire somebody next year with a year and a half instead of 2 years, it's definitely a goal and achievable goal if it goes back.
One of the things at the high school meeting, some of the high school teachers attended a workshop, and they said, and this stuck in, I loved this, because they said, we want to make sure that our students can function in the language, not necessarily have all the functionalities of the language. And my husband, part owner of Lunig's, and I got to tell you, he hardly
cheap plug.
Cheap plug. It was French kept him out of almost not graduating from St. Michael's, but he had a sympathetic French teacher. Language teachers are very sympathetic. We love what we do, so we want our students to love what we do too. But anyway, so my husband, he has a sympathetic teacher. They worked out a deal. Bob graduates from St. Michael's with a C in French, but he got a C and he graduates. He probably said, I am never in my life ever going to have to deal with that language again. And who are his best customers? The Quebecois. And so tonight, when I was leaving, he says, just remember, they keep telling me, Betsy, I speak French well. And it's just because I teach him little phrases, and he just has like I was saying, bonne attitude, just be smiling. But he says, no, they tell me I speak French well. It's like, yes, you do.
So then just one last thing, in addition to kind of tweaking the the actual curriculum, tweaked quite a bit how I teach it this year because of all this, and from some courses I took over the summer, to where the students kind of self-motivate through levels of a chapter. Your daughter is already doing it. And they can choose to do more or choose to do less depending on home and what structures are there. And so some kids are already at the upper levels of 2 of the second level, and so they can kind of self-motivate and still get done in less time than what I would have gotten done before.
So,
One other thing though is that we also are, in terms of the French, we have some students that have exceeded it because of they've been in our school, I think, since birth for some of the board members here, but I've already completed their Spanish or French too. So we
They've completed one.
or one, sorry. So we have a lady that comes in and teaches French to 3 of the students. And we also are in the process of finalizing the Middlebury Interactive Language Program that some people in here, your children will be with.
So virtual experience.
That'll happen by the end of this week. We're trying to get the computers to work for me, actually.
They're already through their first chapter, though. They're
Right.
good.
Yeah.
So
This
next,
is almost like a parent-teacher conference.
That's great.
And then
so
on top
next
of
year,
that,
Kevin?
what's that?
Next year?
Well, that's this year we're doing that, and also this year they being the MIL are allowing us to demo the supplemental pieces, so that they're both getting codes, so that they can actually go in and see what that stuff looks like. So that maybe next year and for this year, see how they can use that to supplement what they're doing on those blue day, white day.
So even though I'm a parent, I'm going to put my board hat on firmly. I think our concern about the change to the plan, which obviously was not planned, meant that we were still delivering on our ends around foreign language and all the aspects that come into play in terms of the 1.0s. And so, given what you know now, and I realize that you're flying the plane as you're building it here, do you feel confident that come the end of the year that the students who you have are experiencing the curriculum in such a way that they will be prepared for what comes next?
I always say, je suis la porte, I'm the door. I open the door. Some kids fly in there. I'll do the best I can, but again, the students, some take little baby steps in, and it takes them a little bit more.
The 8th grade's exactly the same, so they're gonna go the same as previous classes. It's the 7th graders that it's going to be different. We don't, like you said, we don't know what it's going to look like in the end yet. We have all high hopes that it's going to be similar to what it's definitely not going to be the same, but it's hopefully going to be similar to, if not as good as, the past. And we're going to do our best to make sure it's
My other question,
comparable.
thank you. My other question is, have we learned anything so far? And this is purely just a question to provoke some thought rather than me actually needing an answer. But even though this was not planned, are you learning things about this unusual staffing arrangement that might be worth continuing? In other words, this isn't the best option, wasn't the option that we planned for, but is it possible that some of it may turn out to be the way we try to do things in the future, or are we just going to go back to plan A?
I think it's a great
for
question,
next-
Brandon. I don't know if we know the answer in November or
Yeah,
October.
right,
So we'll look at it again as we go further along, and we may not know the answer. We'll know the answer, but it'll be more in April. One of the things that Betsy talked about earlier, and is that in years past, and Betsy, stop if I'm way off, but she would get through 4 units, and then often would find herself in 8th grade having to go back and do that 4th unit again. And instead of looking at it that way, she's spending this year getting those 3 units in and getting them really well, so that she doesn't have to go back. That first month next year will be going into Unit 4 basically the same way as what you do this year. So it's just a matter of how we look at it. So yeah, it's going to be different. I do believe, though, that with the number of days providing it, I feel confident that we'll get there.
Yeah.
Now, will we get there with the enriched, just brought up the cultural pieces? We're gonna miss out on those pieces more.
Mhm.
And it's more of a learning a language
Right.
than opposed to maybe learning the culture and the language.
Right.
Because we were able to teach the 1 year
Right.
that they teach at the high school over 2 years, it really gave us,
Mhm.
Right.
the kids could be excited about the language and what made the language.
Right.
Which isn't, and what we're passionate about.
I don't think this board is afraid of different approaches.
Right.
I think what we're mostly concerned about, what we are concerned about, is whether or not, the way that it's done meets the intention of the ends policy.
Mhm.
And it sounds like you guys have dealt with a tricky situation as best as you could, and it's kind of a wait and see how it all shakes out. But it's clear that you guys are working hard to do your best, so that's reassuring.
I think the message that's gone out is that, we are large supporters of world languages curriculum. And that if we had our way and we had more time in the day, we'd put more resources. In fact, I think offering a world languages program to students in earlier grades makes a lot of sense. It's just trying to fit that into an already, very, very tight instructional schedule
Yeah.
when the time commitment just for core academics is requiring more time than it did 10 years ago. So
Right.
I think it's a really thoughtful question and one which is going to have to be statistically be made on good data. There's certainly a cohort effect in terms of the kids, as Betsy mentioned, the way they present, but I do think these are the types of things, without experimenting and taking risks, that we have to think of a school day in some ways differently at times, but those decisions in the future will only be made if it's based on how it went this year.
Right, obviously.
A couple of just quick questions. The intention for next year is to go back to the way it was. That's sort of the.
From a
I mean, I
staffing-
realize from a staffing point of view, I realize as the comment, there may be some that you learn this year that you do differently because of this year, but in a good way. But the intention is to, staffing-wise, go back to the way it was.
The intent right now is to, I think we need to see what it looks like and see what it feels like in April before we start making decisions. Because what I think Mark was just saying is, and Brandon too, is that we're not opposed to trying new things. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily have I have an intent that we will make sure that we provide enriched Spanish and French curriculum to students by the time they end 8th grade. How we get to that point, I don't know. What exactly that could look like.
Well, the thing that
So-
makes me nervous about going back to Plan A is that you guys obviously had some very significant challenges with staffing up.
Mhm.
And I don't imagine that the landscape is going to change dramatically come June.
Right.
So I just wonder about the staffing requirements. Is there a different way to approach staffing rather than to just try it again if you're going to end up with the same result?
I mean, the policy at the state level is if you haven't taken a look at the education quality standards, you should. And it's still an open document to weigh in on, if you like. There's still a requirement to do 2 classes of PE. And that's a requirement. Foreign languages, there is no requirement. Now, we
Right.
believe, and our ends policy specifically says, we need to have kids that are culturally aware and civic-minded and, globally oriented.
Right.
And, but when you put PE, not that PE is not important, but when you put PE over a world languages program, you to me, that's a policy question that should be directed to the state board.
Right.
And it just forces my hand as a superintendent to say, here's the resource, here's 7 hours that I have, 6.5 hours we have kids. That's
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
a problem.
And Brendan, it is a statewide issue. When
Yeah.
when we're looking for teachers, there was an email that was sent through the Principals Association asking other principals if they know of anyone that could teach French or Spanish. So it's not just an Essex
Right,
issue.
right.
Well, one is perhaps the Middlebury thing.
Mhm.
Is that going to play a greater role? Allow you to get some of those kids more?
Yeah, again,
Instruction.
we don't know what it
looks like.
we don't know what it necessarily looks like yet, but that's the hope, is that we can get that in these
Yeah.
in these
That
two
will be a
hands.
supplement to
Yeah.
what we do.
Yep.
And the other question, this may be an irrelevant question, but why not Peru or Madrid? Why was that a
I
disqualifying?
didn't hear what you said.
Why not Peru or Madrid? We had 2 candidates. Were there other things that disqualified them? Because I'm thinking,
Well, they're not certified in Vermont.
okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
I'm certain they could both speak
Good. I'm just thinking, wow, the cultural point, that would really bring it. Okay, enough.
Jessica's actually challenged me to flip that model, allow her to go to Madrid for a while.
There we go.
Immersion.
Without the kids, right?
We decided it had to be self-funded and in the summer.
Darn it.
Lost its appeal.
Well, the other question,
Maybe
the other
that's
question
where
I
they
had,
get to cultural part in. We'll go on a field trip this summer.
If we lost a half Spanish teacher, why did that affect French? I'm not quite, I don't quite understand why did we have to change up the French program?
Because the numbers going into, so say we have 150 kids coming up from 6th grade into 7th. Typically, there were like 90 kids that went Spanish, 60 that went French, or some numbers
Sure.
broke up.
You can say it like that, that's fine, doesn't matter. You're right, the numbers
And
would be too
then-
large, either way.
And then
Okay.
Spanish would be
She'd have
massive.
a classroom of 60,
And
or a classroom of 90.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the other, that's
no,
my
I
other
mean like
notes.
you know.
Okay.
I'm not doing the numbers right, but so they would, instead of splitting 90 and 60, we had to split 75, 75. So that's why
Okay.
it affected French.
Oh, okay, okay.
Great.
Thank you, that helps.
So, are you done?
I'm done.
Okay. So just on that point, because that wasn't on my list of questions,
Okay.
but that his question was the answer I'm trying to understand. So the request was 90 whatever the balance was, 90 kids Spanish, 60 kids French.
So if they were to have that every day, Kim, then it'd be 90 kids in a class every day, boom, 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 boom,
Right.
or 60 in a day, boom,
But I
boom.
think that Dan's question was if the balance was 90-60 before, and we never had a point anything additional French teacher,
Oh.
correct?
Correct.
And I think if I understood Dan's question, and that was among my questions, how did that impact then either your class sizes currently, or why would it have had to have impacted the French students, since there's still a hole, Betsy, and there's still the same number of kids requesting French?
Right.
So what happened to not allow the Spanish or the French kids
Right.
to have their everyday?
Yep, so this is a large class, much larger than the 7th grade.
We know.
So those, although it looks and sounds like that, the numbers would have been still really large.
So there would have ideally been,
It would have been,
had we anticipated it, we would have been looking for a 1 point something French position
if
as
we,
well.
we could have, but it would have been, yeah. Well, the numbers, the way
But
they.
we knew
the
the
way they
number
can
of
pan
kids
them
when we
out.
budgeted those, so what we
Right.
didn't know is what we had for a Spanish point additional. So we knew what the French anticipation
We can
was,
give, we,
yes, or-
well, yes, but so how the kids assign or they choose for French or Spanish is
Yeah.
based on a first come, first serve.
Right.
So we fill up this, since most of the time, more kids would like to be in Spanish than in French, we make sure that there's, the numbers of Spanish would fill those 2 slots. And then Betsy's would have that class. This year, because of the way it was, we separated them a little more so that it equaled out, so that the class sizes were still, they're still different, but yet it fits for us.
And so there
Does
are
that make-
more kids proportionally in French this year than there have been.
Well, there's
Than usual.
30, how many total do you have?
I have, in 7th grade, I have about 60 kids, so 58 kids.
7th grade?
Yep, so that would,
75.
yep. So it's more, percentage is greater this year than in the past.
And did that work out with their preferences or whatever? or
A lot of them didn't get the
No.
paperwork in anyways.
Oh,
Right.
So then you have
Yeah.
the liberty.
So
to do that.
yes
Okay.
and
They had a
no.
preference, but they didn't tell.
Right.
So you gave them a preference.
Holly gave them a preference. Ken said.
One of my questions was mark the school quality standards, because there was a point at which I knew them very well, and then there's been a point since then where I'd seen the drafts of the outcomes-based version that's being worked on, and I knew that we had not been fully compliant under PE, and I couldn't recall, and that was what I was going to ask, what the language guidance had been even on the old draft. But apparently there's no language guidance for middle school, it's just for high school in that, or?
I thought it was middle as well, but.
I thought there
don't-
was
don't
some
quote
language
me.
requirement
Yeah,
in middle,
it's
but.
2 days a week.
Oh, it was, so we
Think
were
so.
already beyond that before, we're back
Yeah.
to
Neither
the
does
unfortunate, okay.
Yeah, we're in draft stages of that.
When you mentioned cultural component, I definitely was concerned because it's part of the global citizenry and interdisciplinary approach that is pervasive in our end. So, if there's any way to make that available with the Middlebury or any other exposures, the silly songs or the things you have them find on their own. That's awesome. My first 2 kids were placed in Spanish 3, and so I do worry the sort of risk, and let's wait and see for the 7th graders, having them be as equally capable potentially for, I'm guessing that is a bigger reach for you guys to envision, for either French or Spanish, the idea of kids getting through everything and being ready to tackle 3.
I already know in my 7th grade, there's some children who just, who get language. And the high school always says, if they get it, if they don't need a lot of review, or those are the kids that are perfect candidates for French 3.
And to be able to advocate for themselves.
Yes.
Because there are
Yes.
some kids that pick it up, but they don't advocate, so it's gotta be
Absolutely, the combination of.
So do you think, Betsy, there'll be some students?
I already know that there's some of my 7th grade students that right now, I'm looking
Yeah.
at them and they're like,
Yeah.
so it's like, probably I would send them on to
And
French 3.
Our hopes is that with the tweaks that we're making, big or small, and we'll see what comes down the line. I mean, I'm only a couple weeks behind at this point, so we might not have to take out cultural stuff. But, no, I shouldn't say stuff, cultural aspects of the classroom.
Understand.
But, I forget where I was going with that. But we're hoping that it will have the same trajectory
Yeah.
with the changes we're making. So, and reflecting on what they need for the high school, as opposed to what we used to just give them, like the bountiful, yeah.
And there's also a great deal of culture that takes place beyond the foreign language classrooms. I'm looking at Katie Rose back here, and in her classroom, there's
Mhm.
culture
Yeah.
everywhere, so that's good.
Right, that's true, yeah, yeah,
Absolutely
Yes,
understood.
it's
Yeah.
true.
Right, it's not just within the context of
Mhm.
language.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Kim, any other questions?
Does the high school teach
Oh.
language other than Spanish and French?
Japanese.
For example,
Japanese?
Japanese.
would it be easier to find a Japanese?
They only have 2 levels currently at the high school.
Oh, wow.
And so,
And the Japanese course at the high school is I understand, is more cultural. That they don't get much into the language or any of the, it's a cultural thing. That's what I've been told by the high school teachers. And the kids who go into Japanese just love it.
I was gonna say, I had 2
You
students
know,
stop by this past week,
They
just love it.
And especially if a lot of them are, because they get into the anime, the art piece, and so that's all part of it, and then it's manga, I know it's,
Yeah.
so it fits very nicely in a cultural thing. Details I could not give you,
Is Latin taught in the schools at all?
not any longer.
Mhm.
It was online last year, I believe, but I don't think it's offered any longer.
Thank you.
Kim, any other questions? We just need to keep on
Yeah, no, I
task.
was just gonna say that I'm really interested to hear how the Middlebury Interactive
Mhm.
goes for you
Yeah.
guys. Just, it'll be interesting if it works in the agenda at some
Mhm.
point to just hear back on that. I was thinking about it in the context of like math instruction for 7th graders. They do IXL and they do it at home, and you can tell how much time they've spent on it, and it becomes part of their grading.
Mhm.
But they're getting touch to that subject matter out of the classroom in a way that the teacher is very interactive with, in that they see what they're doing and how they're progressing. And I don't know if that's a component of Middlebury Interactive, but it would seem to lend itself to the idea that they could touch the language
Mhm.
on the days off.
Mhm.
That I think that kind of frequency is, you guys would know better than I would, but it strikes me to be very important in language development. So I'm
Okay.
excited that we're looking at creative ways to tackle it. So thank you.
Great. Any other questions or feedback before we move on?
The only thing that, just crosses my mind is because 7th grade is such a large class, is thinking about next year, you were talking about class size. And just, depending on thinking about the future, and there's nothing we necessarily have any answers on, but just thinking about what does that class size look like in this model, with those 7th graders going to 8th grade, potentially having daily class.
Mhm.
And I just think that that's something that just needs to be thought of. with the whole equation.
I agree.
Oh,
Great.
Brendan, do you remember one of our favorite quotes from the conference?
Oh, yes.
Yes. So we'll share my favorite quotes from the conference. A guy talking about class size, and I don't want anybody to be offended by it, but he said if you ask a student or a parent whether they want the best teacher with, 30 or 40 kids in the class, or they want a small class size, and time over time, these students are saying their personal connections with their teacher are the thing that is most inspiring for them. So I don't want you guys to have 30 kids in a classroom by any stretch, or 40 kids in a classroom. I want you to appreciate, though, the impact that good teachers have on kids, even if it's some non-traditional version of how you get to do it. But good teachers like yourselves will make an impact however you decide to deliver it. And thank you for being willing to figure it out.
Yeah. I'd ask as a board if we can just say, Mark, could we have or maybe Kevin, somebody come back in March, April,
Sure.
May, whenever, just say, here's what we think in hindsight, now that we've been at it for 8 months.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
what
or
we think.
maybe earlier if we're on that section of the budget.
Yeah.
I just want to recognize a couple things. First is Kevin's leadership, and principals make decisions, 1,000 of them a day, and Kevin needed to be decisive. And let's not forget that the cards he was dealt were ones that he needed to make a decision on. So I appreciate the decisiveness and an all-around good decision. And to Betsy and Jessica, just job well done. I mean, I would agree that it's all about the relationship, and I can tell you without hesitation that both these educators think a lot about their kids. You've thought a lot about your kids every day since this schedule change and how you plan instruction accordingly based on a very different school year. So I know we have 110% from these two, and I appreciate you coming out tonight.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're done.
You're free.
There's a baseball game on tonight.
Don't you-
Is there?
Oh, really?
Kevin, on the other hand, is not free. I just want to I want to keep motoring. Just some context while I pass this out. This is just this is good work that just bringing forward a set of numbers that I think speak to the effectiveness of the schedule change, and we're not reacting. In fact, we have a good story to share tonight, and like the question Dan asked about coming back in March, we're basically coming back and sharing with you a year later what our numbers look like. And I'll give, again, the floor to Kevin to talk a little bit of anecdotes in terms of the testimony that's
Yeah, I can
out
talk
there.
a little bit the band numbers. This was the hot item of 2012, 2013. To move the band to the end of the school day, to allow more instructional time through the day. There was a bit of unknown, didn't know how people were going to react. We moved a lot of things around in terms of athletic schedules and other things in place. Anyways, the numbers, as you can see it, this is the smallest class size we've had in the last 4 years, and it is the largest number of band participants for 7th and 8th grade, of 58.
Wow.
Talking to Bob, his exact words to me today, I was shocked. Shocked. He's excited about it, that he's not, they're gone now, a lot of them. They're not fighting with the foreign language teachers. Because there was often a time where they were pulling out for lessons and pulling out for this and that, and it was impacting the foreign language, and that was difficult. He talked about that he's not having to fight with classroom teachers either. That what would happen in the past was it would be taking place during an enrichment block, and in an enrichment block there was times where teachers would want you to do more of something or complete an assignment, or you needed algebra help, or you needed something, and kids were being torn. Where do I go? And often they were giving up on band. They were saying, you know what, I want to make sure that my academics in terms of my math, science, language arts stays up to par. I'm going to have to give up something, so I'm going to give up band. With this model, the kids aren't feeling that pull anymore. It's really quite nice. I asked Bob today, because I know that the Essex Boosters has been involved, or at least concerned, and it came down to, he said it was about the value, that he feels like by moving this out, he feels about the Boosters feels that it's devaluing music. And I would almost say it's contrary to that. It actually values it. It no longer puts it in a situation where it needs to be picked. You get to do it all, with this model. It's been great, and it's exciting, and the kids, like last year, on a Friday afternoon, there were 36 kids in the jazz band. So you would think if it was not being successful, there'd be just a handful of kids in jazz band. It was the largest jazz band we've had in years.
So if I'm reading these numbers,
brilliant.
if I'm reading these numbers right,
Mm-hmm.
and if I'm doing my math correctly, which is entirely, there's a chance I did not do it correctly. 2010, 2011, the percentage of students involved in band or orchestra was 24%. This year, we've added chorus. We're at 33%.
Correct. Right.
So
So
we
we could.
23. I was like, you did something wrong.
Yeah,
That's a
no,
23.
this is
You-
my,
it's your
this is my
handwriting's wrong.
handwriting,
Okay.
yeah.
Right. So,
Penmanship was
so yeah, there are some doubles up in there.
Yeah,
because
right,
it-
okay,
It could be in,
right,
in
good
both,
point.
but the bottom line is nearly a third of our students are involved in music through the school.
Right.
That's not counting the kids that are in piano. That's not counting the kids that are doing their instruments outside the school.
Yeah, I don't think it could be overstated that, Brendan, our choral program is growing. And
Oh.
so
Right.
in addition to moving at the end of the school day, we've also, started a choral program, which is becoming stronger.
And our chorus teacher was Megan Bocage. She started up last year. Is phenomenal. And the reason why these numbers are growing, it's because of her. It really is. She has, Joyce,
And the Founders Program.
around 100
Yeah.
students.
129 in chorus.
129 in the 3rd through 5th grade. So I don't know where we plan on having chorus in a couple of years, but it'll be
Gymnasium?
Wear your mittens.
Oh.
we'll have
So-
to. It'll be there.
Thanks, Ken. These data you've seen before, I sent them in an incidental
Right.
update, so it was just knowing that there was some interest, continued to be some interest on the part of the boosters. We wanted to make sure that they knew as well about tonight's meeting and had chosen not to attend. But, I think Kevin and I will talk about how do we connect with the president of the boosters to make sure he has these data as well.
Yeah, just to be clear, they were not, they weren't presented with this meeting as an opportunity to come and engage.
Okay, yeah.
I let Tom know from the boosters that the board was receiving an update tonight, so that then we could better communicate with him
Okay.
About where we are.
I'll leave that in your
So-
court.
Yeah, so it
Okay.
wasn't as if they didn't attend tonight. They understood that this was a board meeting for us to receive an update. So, anecdotally, could you talk a little bit about that, a little bit more about that experience where kids are not being removed from enrichment, and how is,
Sure.
obviously, I assume that helps.
It helps a great deal. So what it used to be, so let's go back in time a few years, is we used to have what was called an enrichment block at the middle school, and it was at a particular time. So all 7th and 8th grade would have an enrichment block for 45 minutes, okay? And in that block was your band. But it was also an opportunity for you as a student to either A, catch up, B, receive more instruction on something that you might have been missing. Often with 8th graders, it's their algebra support time, so they need to get that extra support. That enrichment block was the time. So what we were finding was, one, as you can imagine, you get all the band kids needing to go downstairs. By the time you get down there, you get all their instruments, you probably got 30 minutes to practice. And what would happen is Bob would be not irritated, but he would be, irritated, I guess, with these kids for not showing up, and go and find them and find out, well, I had so much to do. I had this, and this, and this. So the kids were having to pick. Do I want to go to band and be late for this and not understand this, or do I want to stay here and understand this? And then what would happen is kids would drop out. They'd have to make a choice. This year, we have built into our schedule, as well as the other two schools, we have a half-hour intervention block across the school district. So that's for any kid who is either how it's worded at the middle school is, what can I give Brendan to make him academically more successful? So that's the enrichment block or the intervention block, however you want to look at it. And that's not going to impact anything but that intervention block. So kids don't need to choose between band or between this or between algebra or what. It's an intervention block made for them. So it works out really well, if that answers it.
Yeah,
But
no, that's helpful. I think it's hard for us as board members sometimes, especially if you don't have a kid in the particular programs to understand the context.
Mhm.
And also, it's helpful to remember what problem we were trying to solve.
Right.
So,
Well, what we solved was we needed more instructional time.
right.
And within that, we were able to build in this half-hour intervention block, so we touch upon both the kids that are struggling as well as the kids that need some extra or some enriching activities. For example, during this enrichment block or intervention block, Larry Lausch, one of our math teachers, takes a group of 6th graders and gives them some enrichment time on Thursdays, and doesn't add on to what they're doing, but actually goes deeper into what they're learning, which is just, it's wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful.
So we solved that problem while also strengthening and increasing participation in our music programs.
I believe so. I mean, the numbers say that, and we'll continue to work hard. I think there's lots of things. I think there wasn't an option to join from 5th to 6th grade. You were in, and there wasn't a form that was sent home that said, "Do you want to be in band?" It was assumed that since you played the flute in 5th grade, you'll be playing the flute in 6th grade. Get them in there, and because unfortunately there's this feeling coming that the big middle school where it's much more demanding and more independent. It adds a little stress. Once they get in there, they realize it's really not so bad after all. So
The principal's an okay guy.
the principal's okay once in a while.
Any other questions or feedback?
Dave?
Are individual band, orchestra, whatever, lessons given during the day?
Yes, it depends. There are some parents choose to have it outside of the day, and some parents choose to have it.
But basically, these numbers that you present are when the entire band, orchestra, or chorus gets together as a unit. Is
Correct.
that basically correct?
Correct. Yeah, if in order for you to have lessons, you need to be part of band.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, that does take place. It does not take place during the foreign language time in 7th grade. They have that every other day piece.
But
So-
there's other creative times during the day when certain students have the ability to have their lessons.
Creative. There's just so many times
Yes.
during the day that
That's
you try not to impact as much as you can.
Yes.
And that's the same as the band down in 5th grade. They get pulled out for their individual lessons
I assume. I
for
don't
a
know.
half hour a week.
Is it always the same class? Or is
It-
like half
It
the-
can be.
I know, I remember that to not be the case, I just didn't know
It's
how it was
It's a
done.
blue-white thing, so every other, you're gonna get it. And it depends on the kid, because there are certain kids that does take place, and there are certain kids that doesn't.
And they could elect to do it after school too, or?
For
or
lessons?
no, they-
For lessons?
For lessons, the lessons
See,
are always during the day.
Band is at that block.
Okay.
But I'm thinking, there was also talk about how the athletics
Mhm.
and music would interact. Would
Mhm.
this boot kids out of athletics or boot them out of band because they want to do athletics? My understanding is the timing should work, that you could do both. Is it?
The timing does work most of the time. There's 2 sports that throw it off: cross country and track. And the reason for that is because when you go to a cross country meet, there's at least a dozen schools there, and it's hard to say to them, "You need to change everything because of us."
Yeah.
When we go and we travel to Edmonds for a soccer game, it's just one other team. So we can say we can't play until 4:30 or whatever it is. So it works out really well. So during the cross-country season, there were, I think, 3 days where they had away meets that started a little bit early.
Yeah.
A couple more than that.
No, I think I talked to Bob today. He said there's only 3 that impacted it. And then on the other end, during track, there's more because there's just more meets. What we do is we also push it as close to that time as we can, that 3:15 block, to have the buses depart. So the kids that are not in band all change beforehand, so that there's not 120 kids in the locker room, and it gets the kids out really fast. So we've got it down much better.
Cool.
So yes, it does impact, but nowhere near like
Okay.
I think people were envisioning. It was going to be this massive.
I have to say, I think the coaches for the most part were very understanding too, because I remember with Zachary with that, they'd be like, okay, go as late as you can, and he'd be one of the last ones running onto the bus.
This is warm up for the
It
race.
was warm up for the event.
That's right. It was a good warm up, Rachel.
But it's a little stressful for the kids feeling like I'm late for the bus run.
Mhm.
That choice, but it was few. It wasn't as many as.
I did ask today if we've left anyone behind, and we have not left anyone behind this year.
Any other questions or comments on this topic?
I could probably wait and get home and ask Abby, but which part of the day is the intervention block? I'm embarrassed to not know
It depends on the
that.
team.
Okay, so it's a team-based thing.
Yep.
The homeroom happens every day, just because I know there's some difference in structure this year
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
So the homeroom, this year we have, every team in the entire school is doing what is called developmental design. And that's the first block of the day. So that's from 7:30 until about 5 of. In that block, they have, well, we talked about this last time, so I
We
won't
did,
go
yeah.
into it again.
Yeah.
But, so you'll remember what that was, but it
Yeah.
was great. And then some other half hour during the day, or 45 minutes, depending on the team.
Yeah.
Some teams do it for a half hour, some teams build their snack and silent reading into it, so they do a little bit more. There's a half hour block at least where there's an intervention time.
And then they meet again at the end of the day, correct? For-
Depends on, again, it depends on the team.
Okay.
Like the sixth graders, their unified arts end at 2:15, so then they all come back at 2:15, get their things, get ready to go. So it depends on the team.
Thank you.
Great, well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Appreciate the update.
All right, I'm out of
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
I do have one
You can
quick
remain
question.
if you like.
Do feel free to stay.
Yeah, I again, just to commend Kevin and Peter and Joyce, I mean, having practiced at the building level for 10 years, your instructional schedule, you work it so it will become an asset, not your nemesis. And again, a bold move that was made after, thinking about it a lot and talking to different stakeholder groups. Obviously not all stakeholder groups in terms of the direction that Kevin took, but looking at the finite amount of time we have, and how do you do things like personal learning plans and French 3 and band or a music program as robust as it is at EMS, it's very challenging. And you think about standards-based education when we're being held accountable to high standards which demand real time going into teaching mathematics and science and ELA and social studies, you run out of time. And so to be creative, as Kevin was and Joyce and Peter are, and looking at that time and trying to make it work for all students to enrich their educational experience beyond the Common Core is really a challenge. So a bold move, and it was a topic for some discussion, but I think we've demonstrated through some good data that it seems to be working.
It was, and since you're commending people, I want to just commend Bob Stone. It was not easy, you can imagine, but it took some, he's a professional, and he said, I'm going to make this work, and that's what he did.
And is his, I don't want you to speak for him if you can't, but is his takeaway from the change and being able to look at this data, does he look back and say, boy, this was a good change?
I don't want to speak for him,
Okay,
but
okay.
he has.
I would say yes.
I'll tell you, remember I mentioned earlier.
This is being televised.
Precisely.
I mentioned at one point that they would get about 30 minutes of instruction.
Yeah.
He's now has nearly 45 minutes if you just take out that first 15-minute
Yeah,
block.
right.
So it's just adding 15 minutes a day for 90 or 36, 72 days a year
Yeah, right.
is
It's a
quite a
lot.
few.
Well, it's a 50% increase.
Yes, David, quick.
Can you give us an idea on a daily or weekly basis how many EMS students ride the activity buses?
The activity buses? Well, there's 60 band, so you got to throw those in there. It depends on when in the year, because the first 7 weeks of the school year is soccer, right? So the soccer season, field hockey, cross-country running.
Bottom line is the activity buses are well used for these programs.
The bottom line is, if we didn't have the activity bus,
You wouldn't have
that wouldn't be happening.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Well, thanks again, and thanks to the board for your good questions. Before we go into the next part of the presentation, I'd like to offer some perspective. Is that all right with you?
Of course, fine with me, yeah.
It's my prerogative.
It is your prerogative.
Board members, dear board members, we are back here to consider our ends policy and the monitoring report that Mark has put together. And I was reflecting a lot on our last meeting and thinking about policy governance, because it's come up a lot at the conference. It came up at our networking session. And there was some, 4 years ago when we started to make this transition to policy governance, one of the main concerns was the board won't have enough data. The board will feel removed. And I have to say, in thinking about the written report for this monitoring report, as well as the presentation, and here we are again tonight to consider some even more information about our ends policies, I feel like I have more information as a board member than I've ever had in going on my 6th year as a board member. I feel like I have more information and data now about outcomes and student performance than we ever had before. This is my personal perspective. We had a lot more data about line items in the budget than we had about student performance on reading assessments, for example. So for me, in thinking about what's been presented so far and the follow-up tonight, is we are really being given an insider's view on some of this data that most boards might not have. We've done a lot of connecting in the last week or so with other boards, and I've got to tell you that I really feel like our board is functioning at a very high level in terms of our questions, our interests, our focus on policy. So I think we should feel good about that. When I hear some of the horror stories of other boards wrestling with, very different kinds of issues than I think we would address, it's reassuring to know that that we're at the level that we are in terms of our governance. The second thing I wanted to say is that it just so happened that the policy governance networking session was about ends monitoring.
Perfect.
And Brent Kay, who's the superintendent of Randolph, was there, and then I had a chance to follow up with their chair at the annual VSBA meeting. And they've been at policy governance at least a couple more years than we have, and they are still struggling with how do you monitor these ends policies. It's the concepts are so big, the questions are so large, and the topics are so complex. What are the right indicators? What is the right data? What are the right questions to ask as board members? So I guess I offer this as a preamble because I want us to appreciate where we are as a board, and I also want us to appreciate the fact that we are sort of on the bleeding edge of trying to lead our community, our schools in a different way. And we should give ourselves a little bit of slack if we don't get it perfectly right. So with that, I want to turn it over to Mark and allow you to continue your presentation on this ends policy, hoping that the board has come to this meeting fully versed in the written report, having had time to think about the presentation. We also had an opportunity to provide some questions to Mark after our last meeting, which I know he's incorporated in his presentation tonight. And my hope is that we can end this meeting, maybe not in total agreement on all the details, but with an agreement that the policy or the monitoring report that's being presented tonight satisfies two key questions that we have as a board. Do we agree with the superintendent's interpretation of the policy? And was the evidence provided, did that evidence support the interpretation? Those are the two key questions that we need to answer as a board operating in a policy governance model. So with that, Mark,
Okay, thanks,
take it away.
Brendan. So we have 55 minutes, and I'd like to think we can get through this piece of it, but we'll take as long as the board wishes to answer questions, as many as we can, regarding what you received 2 weeks ago and the update that you received in the mail last week. But there is a presentation on ways that one way we approach monitoring student performance, and I'd like to work that presentation for you if we have time for it within the next 55 minutes or so. So I know you've read the report as revised. You sent a lot of good questions. I felt that a number of them that rather than trying to incorporate my answers into the report, I could just respond to them at the systems level. As I said in my notes to you, hopefully all questions will remain germane to the interpretation and evidence piece that you mentioned. Those three parts that I addressed, one was putting a stronger rationale in the revision on why we're moving towards a more holistic way of monitoring performance vis-a-vis student grades, even though there's a lot of work that still remains, and making sure that those data are always as reliable and valid as they can be. I made a comment because I think I heard the question not in writing but orally was, am I in compliance or not? I think that's something that the board and I should talk about. What does compliance mean with an ends report? And then finally, I just basically grabbed the strategies that we talked about, albeit quickly, 2 weeks ago, and put that at the end of the report to make sure that the board in perpetuity will see a report that states that we're doing something, I'm doing something about, the gap that exists. One last thing, and then I'll just turn it back to the board, is that the interpretation of this ends report looks vastly different than you've ever seen before. And in fact, it's an interpretation that the leadership team understands and supports, and we're trying to tie the work that we're doing as school leaders, whether it be through budget development or through posts on our blog sites or looking at professional development in the district, making sure that it all ties to this ends policy interpretation. So, as I said 2 weeks ago, the former interpretation was very narrow, and this is way more comprehensive. That said, there are only 3 of those indicators out of the 5 that relate to ends. The other relate to means. And so I think I heard Rachel ask the question, would there be evidence in this report for all of this new interpretation? The answer is no, because it's just so new, and so I'm automatically not in compliance. But I did mention in my report to you that the compliance issue was just focused on that first part of the interpretation, which that is mastery of core academics, and there were 2 areas that I was below that students performed, according to report card data, below the 80% benchmark. So there is some new language, but again, I'm prepared to answer questions you may have, and would ask assistance from the leadership team members who are present to try to answer questions that you may have tonight.
So we'll throw it back to board members. You've had a chance to review the updated monitoring report and to reflect on the presentation that we received last meeting.
Which was a lot.
So questions, feedback, comments?
If no one's going to jump in, I'll jump in. My general sense on the 2 questions Brendan posed, do we agree with the interpretation? I will say I have no problem with the interpretation, little tweaks, little questions, little bits here and there. I'm a data fanatic.
You're a what?
I'm a data fanatic.
Oh.
That's the place I've had the most questions, and particularly on the series of presentations we've had over the last 12 months, as we're looking at some very specific data that are a subset of what we're looking at with this larger piece of data. And that's where I'm still find frustration with, particularly when we get to, I know the TV can't see it, but the column of all the standards proficiencies, the ones from the spring, the fall, and all of that. And that's the one that data I still feel like is, I don't know if I want to say questionable, but we talked last spring about report card data. We had one presentation that was based primarily on report card data, and we pretty much had a universal agreement, I believe, including you. I don't want to speak for you, but that's all I recall, that maybe that didn't cut it. Maybe the report card data is too subjective, too whatever. Well, we're going to rebuild the report card system. Great. But we're still rebuilding it. We haven't rebuilt it yet. It's in process. Fabulous. And so my question is, yes, this idea of us creating some new assessment system that is using the teacher's interpretation, which I think is, I agree with you. The teachers are the most qualified to make that call. But I don't feel like a report card system has been adjusted, unless there's stuff that's happened that I don't know about, to be the primary data point. And so we have to look to the kneecap stuff. And it's just frustrating to me that the 2nd grade kneecap stuff is not there. And you also identify the 5th and 8th grade kneecap data as being exit data, when in reality, that's 2/3 of the way through data, because it should be 6th and 9th grade kneecap data. So I would expect to have in this kneecap proficiency column 3rd grade, 6th grade, 9th grade
kneecaps. So we're saying, okay, what are the kids got when they're done? Because that's what tests the second grade, fifth grade, eighth grade knowledge. And so I feel like there's still this glaring gap of data that is the objective data, that if you flip down a few pages, you've actually got it, wherever it is. Here we go. Kneecap reading proficiency in grade 3. There it is. We've got the data. Why aren't we using that data? And then our 6th and our 9th, which is not on this column, but exists. Why aren't we using that data as relevant information? Because I think that's the more objective stuff at this point.
So let me just clarify. So you feel that kneecap is more objective and therefore more valid in terms of an assessment of student learning?
At this point, given that our report card system is presumably in process of changing, but it's certainly not landed on something.
Well, it was. I'm just interested in the focus on kneecap, and it's a logical focus because we have looked at these numbers every year,
right,
as long as I've been on the board.
Right, we have history there.
Yeah, but the world is going to change dramatically. And that's what is shocking to me and makes me wonder not so much about this report, but about future reports. As we move to Common Core, kneecap goes away.
Exactly.
So, in terms of the data that is available to judge whether, and if that data supports the interpretation of the policy, it's going to be a really tricky thing for you to navigate, I would assume, in the coming years, because we're not going to be able to compare kneecap to Common Core.
Right.
It's apples to oranges. So, so anyway, or SBAC. So I think that's really the challenge. I mean, for me, that's the challenge looking ahead, is that what are the data points that are going to be the most relevant? So I applaud the work that's being done to re-engineer and to develop some consistent standards across the district for report card data, because in the end, that may be the only data that we can really look historically with any, next year at this time, we might be like, oh, thank God we've got report card data, because if we didn't, we wouldn't be able to compare, a trend line.
Well, but there should be a significant amount of other data out there. Back, I've read the Read Report cover to cover a couple times. Well, that's an exciting way to spend a month. There's a lot of talk about the data that we should be collecting that they identify there. So there's a whole chunk of data that, okay, if we don't want to use kneecap, there's all that data. And granted, that's reading and math. That's not social studies, science, personal development. I get it. That doesn't get it all. But there's some very objective data that, it lays out, here are the things we should be testing. Here are the tools we should use to test them. And he lays out in Appendix D, there's about 10 different things he lays out. Says, we could use any one of these. So, okay, where's that data? Where's the Ames Web? Where's the, we don't use that one. What do we use?
I think if I can respond, there's a lot to you have
multiple
questions there. And again, I wanted to just be cognizant of time and I'm trying to look it forward and not look a year ago what happened. Okay, so that's one of the sort of the philosophical underpinnings of this monitoring is not about postmortem. Monitoring is about how do you look forward. So, looking at a more holistic score of report cards, I think focuses on, because it's real work, it's what teachers are doing every day in their classrooms, helps us look forward rather than how did we do last year. Kneecap data, you have access to that. We made a conscious decision, I did, to look at the gateways, the times that the big changes in kids' lives are at the end of 2nd grade, the end of 5th grade, and the end of 8th grade. Those are transition years for kids. So I could easily stick 3rd grade kneecap data if that's something the board wishes. That's not, I'm not concerned about that. We can put it out there, but I was trying to stick to some consistency around 2, 5, and 8. Yes, absolutely. I did go on record a year ago as saying that our report card data are more subjective than I'm feeling comfortable with. Even though we haven't created a new report card, which I stated in the report, we're working it. It's not the report card, it's the work that goes into deciding what that grade is. And we've changed immeasurably in the last 12 months as the PLCs have blossomed and we're looking more at student work and we're calibrating around what does this piece of writing and this science experiment, what's this math problem. what is that? What score might that be? Is it a 3 or a B? We've gotten much stronger, and I would admit that we still have a lot of work to do there. If you see the data, for instance, scores jump a little bit. And why in 5th grade and Founders do we score in writing in this point, but the grades are higher? Because we have an alignment issue. But I think we've got to continue with a report card system, because you're right, Brendan, a state assessment's going to continue to change, and it's just one data point at one time of the year that will be triangulated with other data that we have, whether it be summative data through our own curriculum work, whether it be formative, the work that teachers are doing, but that's one piece of the story. I want to go on record. Rich Reed did not come in here to tell us how to revamp our regular ed curriculum. He was hired because we had a problem in special education, and that's why I hired the guy. And so he took liberty, and I thought it was a job well done, to identify other systems issues. But it wasn't. It was about special ed. So I'm not going to respond to the question about Ames Webb and other things. He's a practitioner, one of 1,000 we could have hired, who has particular bias and opinion about what might be helpful. But I think it's a real gross assumption to think that we're not taking data in a number of areas that are not reported in this report. But we've got principals here who can talk about, and I'm going to, if we get to my presentation tonight, you're going to see how we're using lots of different sets of data. Included in that are things that Rich Reed suggested, okay, that come up with a composite score called a report card grade. So I do believe that we're headed in the right direction, and again, if the board's will is to say, let's make that part of the report, I could do that. But again, 2, 5, and 8 were those benchmark years that I was focusing on.
Right.
Joyce, you look like you're about to jump out of your chair.
She's got to be recognized by the board chair.
I'm sorry.
Yes, Joyce.
I was going to comment. I was going to comment when Mark was doing his report, because
Okay.
he's talking about the very same.
Cool. You just look so ready to go. I didn't want you to.
Very enthusiastic.
So, Mark, I notice on page, oh boy, I'm not sure which page this is on. This is the last page of the narrative, just before the addendum. You do say in this report that based on your current interpretation of the ENDS policies, that you're not in compliance in writing for grade 2, writing in grade 5, and math in grade 5.
And that was based on the report card.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I just wanted to be clear that, but that list above it, though, that is the list of things that the district is employing to address some of the challenges that you identify in the report.
Yeah, and it was part of that PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
Yes. And so
Okay.
there's no narrative there, but yeah.
I remember that. I just wanted to be clear that I was reading that correctly.
Well, I guess the question I'm hearing, at least from Dan, that the interpretation makes sense. How I monitor that, the evidence I bring forward, I guess is, again, sort of a work in progress. But I guess I'd like to hear more from other boards in terms of the evidence piece. Again, I'm trying to get the right sort of balance of trying to stay big, looking forward, not looking back. And what I'm hearing from you, Dan, is that more specificity, more detail, based on our local assessment plan, which I'm choosing not to mine those data, I'm trying to, again, stay big, is something that you have a particular interest in.
And the reason for that, I would say yes, and the reason for that is, again, to quote you 2 weeks ago, the reading wars are not over in Essex. They're clearly not. You stated that. Okay, if we have competing ways of how we think, now we, the board, how we in Essex think literacy, and very passionate opinions about how literacy and math should be taught. I'll stick to those two.
Yeah.
If we have certain recommendations and we're doing things differently, then I think that gives us need to go to that level of specificity in the data.
Well, let me respond, because I don't want you to take the comment that I made, because I think you brought it up out of context. There's no war in Essex Town. We have, in what we'll show you in a presentation, is those decisions around how we teach, how we assess, how we monitor the building level is up to classroom teachers. It's not being directed by anybody but the people, members of that PLC. Are there certain teachers in the district, whom some of you probably know, have an opinion about things? Absolutely. Teachers are passionate folks who really believe that these are the types of things that I need to affect learning in students. Do we collide sometimes at the table in terms of my opinion versus your opinion? Absolutely. But, you know, I those opinions will always be there. The bottom line is, what's the end result? What's the aggregate? What's the composite score of that kid? And how we got there is up to teachers to make those decisions. I'm not directing, nor is anybody at the central office directing the traffic at the. That's why we moved to a PLC model, because the best decisions are made at the table by educators with principals facilitating the process.
Right.
So, again, in this quick presentation I'll give tonight, I want to break out reading a little bit because I think there's a particular interest in early literacy. So I'll show you some of the ways that we're addressing that through assessment, and the work is directed at the building level. And those wars are not getting in our way by any means. But are there opinions that are different? Absolutely.
So, go ahead. I want to, because you've been referring to this presentation a lot, and it would
I'm
be
trying to get you pumped.
It'd be a shame not to get to it. So I want to make sure that we're hearing, though, before we get to the presentation, which might answer some of our
It may,
questions.
I hope,
Yeah.
yeah.
Any other board comments or questions?
I definitely do have comments and thoughts on interpretation and not necessarily specific to any pot of data, but if that illuminates anything, it may make sense to wait. If I'm okay waiting,
I'm
but
okay waiting.
I don't want to
you may
forego
wanna
my
ask, 'cause I don't know
opportunity
if
to
it will
comment on the big
illuminate or not,
issues
but
that we
you never know.
are
Well,
really trying to make sure.
Why don't we touch on the interpretation piece, because that just raises a flag for me. I want to make sure that we understand or have input or questions about the interpretation, because it is different. It is significantly different from before.
For me, it's the first time I've seen the interpretation.
All right.
And
So it's not
so
a
for
change.
me, it's not a change. But to me, it spoke to exactly what I thought it should be saying. Does that make sense? That without, and like I said, I could look back and see, but to me, it seemed to capture a lot of what I understand from when we went over the strategic plan. Everything seemed to mesh well. And so for what I was looking for an interpretation of the policy, that seemed to hit for me. So I personally felt that is what my understanding is our goal for the ends for our kids.
Yeah, I think that, and I know Kim has a question, but I just, what you said sparked for me that the difference between now and then is that because all of the policies arrive at the table together, a lot more time and a lot more information and a lot more, receiving and processing that information is required by the board. So if we're to continue with this interpretation, which I think is, it does ring for me as well, we might just want to think about how we plan for this report in the future. We might just say, because of the interpretation and the fact that all these policies arrive together, because of their interconnectedness, let's plan 2 meetings.
Yeah, what was said last time.
So I think that might make sense moving forward, so that, and just quickly, what I realized that the step in the process that perhaps we missed, although I think we have done it before, is typically before a big monitoring report, we would have an opportunity to talk with Mark about what are the indicators that we feel we want to see in the report that might be important. And so in the past, we've talked about evidence, direct inspection, we've talked about specific, data points that might be helpful in terms of the evidence. We didn't have that conversation before this particular report, and I wonder a little bit, reflecting on our last meeting, if part of that led to some of the sort of discombobulation that we had at that meeting, the fact that we didn't have a chance to provide you with that input before the monitoring report showed up on our desk.
And I almost think that we almost need to have it documented from year to year, because I don't want to see that conversation every single time this comes up. I don't think that's fair to you. I don't think that's fair to us. And that's its own conversation, I think, in a lot of ways. But I think if we start looking at, okay, what were the expected data last year? What's the expected data this year? If we start at least having a starting point for the conversation prior to a policy, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Kim.
I like the interpretation. I am trying to make sure I can draw lines between what we're saying we're monitoring in our ends and where it shows up in interpretation. And core subjects definitely do. The context of interdisciplinary themes might be harder for me to figure out where civic literacy is specifically alluded to,
Mhm.
specifically alluded
Mhm.
to. That's
Mhm.
pretty interesting, right? So where it
I can do
would,
that.
you knew what I was going with,
I do
right?
every
That,
day.
there is an obvious spot that it falls under one of your interpretations, and I'm not positive that I can draw that line if we're letting our community know that we're monitoring these areas, or global awareness and sustainability. And I know relevance and connections may capture some of that,
Yeah.
but it's not as explicit. And I like that it helps us maybe better understand what we're going for in our ends. So for that, I really like the interpretation. But our ends are pretty specific about some things that we're looking to monitor and what context we're looking to monitor them. And the interpretation doesn't hit that as specifically.
Yeah.
So I think that's something to be aware of, not to decline this interpretation, but to think about it
that, yeah.
for a future interpretation, because
Well, future evidence. Right?
evidence or really interpretation, because I
Okay.
think if we're not interpreting it to be more explicit on those areas, then we're not fair in expecting there to be evidence for it. So,
Right.
so I think,
Well, you're astute, and the relevance connection piece is sort of where I was trying to capture that,
capture
so
all
we
of
don't
it.
have the bullets sort of hanging under, and that includes,
Yeah.
you know, pop up, pop up, pop up, pop up. So, but that's a good
and
observation.
some of it's there, but I think it might be a little harder to find where that language meets the interpretation, and have people sort of know where we would have asked you for evidence that we were doing those things. And that was just sort of the overarching. We as a board need to consider, since we're monitoring in this 1.1 through 1.4, and we continue to not be specific about 1.3 for reasons we all understand to be very embedded in everything we do. They're,
Right.
literacy around technology. So I think we as a board need to make sure we address that. I think that may not be a policy that is separately monitored anywhere, but it is so much a part of our culture now that it
Right.
goes without saying.
Or maybe it goes with saying, but as sort of a general statement that
Right.
precedes the policy at large.
It's not even written in here. We skip it in
We
the
skip it, right?
in the ends policies. We didn't put 1.3. You say up at the top that we're monitoring 1.1 through 1.4, but we don't even stick it in there.
That's right.
And even leaving, if we should choose to leave it in there because we believe it needs to stand there as a way to affirm that this is embedded in our instruction and curriculum, we can maybe have that conversation to determine the appropriate way to do it. Either we get rid of that policy or we leave it in there and affirm that it is that type of a statement, that it is embedded in all the pieces of the rest of the
The
policy.
first bullet talks about, that's why I led with the integration of technology to achieve these outcomes, but, yeah.
So,
But from a policy standpoint, you're wondering out loud if the board needs to address possibly a revision, if that's
if
gonna
that doesn't go somewhere up
right. If
at
it's
the
not gonna-
top rather than in 1.0 or whatever that little lead-in statement is,
Right.
and then it doesn't hang out there by itself. And I think at the time we put these policies in, we did question that, whether
That's
it
right.
should have as much weight to be on its own as any of the other core subjects. It was sort of a highlight of the investment that was happening in our district at that time. It was a
right.
transitional time for us. It's
Smart
really
boards, anyone?
strikingly the way that it's happening in our district, as I can see it juxtaposed to many districts throughout the state. We take it for granted, but it is the way it is. So
Yeah.
I think we collectively, Mark and the board needs to figure out how we want to address that so it's clear and consistent
Yeah.
as we're monitoring
Well,
these.
it makes me wonder, Kim, one of the things that this board has said that it wants to do this year, this academic year, is to re-engage the community about the ends. And so it seems to me if we do that, that would be a great conversation to have with our stakeholders.
Mhm.
Does this stand on its own?
Right.
Does it deserve its own time in the spotlight?
Mhm.
Or is it just the way that we operate? I mean, having kids in the district, I see
Right.
it's just another tool.
Right.
It's an important tool, but it's just it's just natural. It's second nature,
Right.
much the way that pens and notebooks were second nature in our school experience. So, it's a really good observation.
So, and then my others are more to data. I don't think it's data or evidence, I would say. And I don't think it's necessarily going to show up in what you're doing. But why don't we do that? And since my others are sort of, okay, under these interpretations, these are ideas that might be solid evidence that we may have numbers for that make sense. So
Okay.
they have nothing to do with kneecap or that sort of stuff. So why don't we wait till after, though, because it's more on the evidence side. If that's
So
okay.
if the board is comfortable, why don't we shift and let Mark give us this presentation on using assessments to drive instruction in Essex Town School District. And then we can come back to any additional questions that this sparks or questions that you've got written down prior to the meeting. Mark.
Thank you. So I'm going to again try to be sensitive to the time. One of the things I did last year on 3 different occasions was to provide the board with some subgroup data, and that didn't work in all cases last year. So I wanted to do something a little bit different this year, and those data are still available, Dan, to look at if that's the type of report that you'd like to see. And I've got a little data to show you tonight in that regard relative to reading. But we been talking a lot about assessment and what we're trying to assess, how we assess, how we use those results, and as a leadership team, we've been talking more about a model called data walls, assessment walls, that really is going to illustrate for the board, I hope, the boots to the ground work that educators are beginning to do at EES and at FMS. Kevin has just started thinking about that at EMS and whether it'll be utility using a data wall at the middle school at some point. But some of the concepts I'm going to share tonight apply to all schools, but here in this district, the data walls are starting to grow in their usefulness at both the elementary school and at FMS. So this is a presentation that looks at one way that we monitor student performance, and again, I'll show some data from this year. And I think I know how to do this. Do I press this button? No.
Turn it on.
Oh no, I didn't turn it on. So I wanted to set some context because before you assess, you have to identify what it is that we're teaching. And it's multi-layered, as you can see. Common Core state standards, I know the board has an interest in knowing where we are as it relates to Common Core. You did receive a presentation back in April and earlier in the fall in 2012, but we can continue to educating the board around what it is and where we are in terms of our alignment. But these are just big overarching ideas, concepts that all states in the country now are, well, not all, but pretty close to all states in the country are adhering to. It comes from the AOE. It is the mandate. It's adopted and only in mathematics and in ELA, English Language Arts. The work we're engaged in now primarily is developing the curriculum frameworks that live underneath the Common Core. So this doesn't give you the roadmap. This doesn't provide the scope and sequence, what it is that we're teaching, and where in the year it falls. This Common Core doesn't do that for us. So teachers and school leaders and consultants are developing the frameworks that live under here in math and ELA. It's got to be curriculum guarantees. So what you heard on the Monday, the 21st, at the Superintendent Roundtable from some parents is that the experiences our kids are having are different depending on, the teachers that they have. And so that really reflects guarantees in the curriculum. And the Common Core and our frameworks are getting us in a line in terms of when you enter a 7th grade classroom, your science experience in terms of what you're learning has to be the same. It's got to be guaranteed for all kids. The work that's doing that are teacher leaders, math committees. Ellen has a large role in facilitating that. Building principals do as well. We have internal and external coaches, and it's all within the construct of a PLC. So through the consultation and facilitation of leaders, that work around curriculum frameworks is being developed for the district K-8 by these folks. Underneath the curriculum frameworks are the unit plans. It's hard to do this before you have that. And it's hard to do these lesson plans before you have this and this. So the work is messy this year. It's stressful. It's creating anxiety because we've got to show up and teach kids every day. And at the same time, with a little bit of time we have during our school day, we've got to develop this work. And that's that's challenging this year. And we're hopeful that this is going to be the year that we get the work done, using our professional development time differently, structuring our school days differently to allow teachers the time to work together. Those units of study live under curriculum frameworks. That's the stuff that teachers are doing for that trimester, that second semester, that third semester, making sure we've projected out what those units of instruction look like. 3 or 4 years ago, you could go into a classroom and it would look different in terms of what a teacher is teaching science in this classroom, what a teacher is doing down the hall, and they might be in the same grade. So these unit plans really have to be cogent and also aligned with standards and what that team feels is the best way to approach that. And that's done by teachers, with special educators, collaborating with them on what these plans look like. And then under that, quickly, are the lesson plans, and that's what teachers, the bread and butter in terms of they don't start that work on Sunday night. That work is well thought out ahead of time.
Question. Am I correct in assuming, or partially correct, that the information presented on that last slide, every school district around us develops that contents of that chart?
With the exception of SBAC or Common Core.
So really, even though we're all living to the Common Core standards, everybody is developing their own curriculum without any
Consistency?
I can't say continuity, because there will be continuity, but
Well,
we aren't necessarily out on the same page with each other.
In this region, I think I would say we are, David. I mean, teams are doing their work at the schoolhouse level, but we have regional work. There are school leaders that work monthly together and making sure that we're not out of alignment.
So,
we're
for
supporting
example,
each other.
Chittenden East, Essex Town, and Chittenden Central would basically all have the same curriculum.
Basically, that's the concept, but I think that you've identified a problem that we have in the state, that we don't have curriculum writers that we hire as a region to do the work. Every district is doing it on their own. Yeah, but there's good networking, at least in this county.
Doesn't that almost lead to failure on Common Core test results?
Well, I think that will be something to watch, and those districts that are performing better on SBAC, which is our scores are going to be lower when we start with SBAC. It's just because the standards are higher. The state will look at those data, what parts of the region are stronger, and how do we learn from those districts who's doing a better job. So it's not about win-lose, it's about trying to grow a system basically starting from scratch in some ways.
Move on.
Whoops.
A real quick, because you talked about, oh dear.
How do I go back?
Someone else is going to go back for you. While you're going back, PLCs. Are PLCs,
There you go.
does all second grade fall under one PLC? Does all EES fall under PLC? Are there like 3 PLCs for the 5th grade? How big is a PLC?
A PLC can be one person, no, it can't be one, it can be 2 people, it can be up to 7, and no, up to 11 in this particular building. So on Wednesday mornings, the 3rd grade PLC meets, that's the 7 3rd grade teachers, plus the special educators who work on that level, plus the consultant. And in math, sometimes it's also Karen Jeffries, who's doing some math coaching this year. They meet together. However, daily, the teams meet, and a team could be 2 or 3 members. They meet daily, but once a week they meet with not only their own, they meet with the 2 or 3 members of their team, plus the special educators, plus the guidance counselor. Sometimes it includes the behavior specialist. I attend one every month. And at those meetings, we're really looking at how, what are they studying, and how are the individual kids doing within that team, and who needs extra support. And at that team meeting, at that PLC, you're identifying actual intercessions that you can use with students. But our PLCs, 5th grade PLC, however, is different.
The conflict this year is that the PLC in its absolute form is to look at student work on a regular basis, and as a group of educators and specialists make decisions around instruction to improve performance the following week type of thing. The messiness of the work is that we are adding other responsibilities to the PLC to also look at curriculum frameworks, to start developing units, and that's where the conflict is. So we have to get through this period of time, David, because there's no one doing the work for us. We're just told, you got to align, so someone has to do it.
And
it's
anybody's going in the
interfering
wrong
with
direction.
the purity of what a PLC should be, and that's, we'll get through it.
So when you say a PLC develops a curriculum or a common assessment, you could say, if that system is working, we would say, well, then probably the whole entire third grade has that same
Oh, yeah.
curriculum
Yes.
assessment. The
Yeah,
entire
yeah.
fifth grade.
That's the work we're
entire
doing.
first grade. Okay, so
The-
And
we're
vertically.
we're losing that disparity in one group's doing this and one group's doing that.
I tell you, I think, Dan,
Yes.
a good example, at EES, we have, our grade level teams are grouped as PLCs.
Okay.
All of our kindergarten teachers meet together along with our Head Start and our preschool folks, who also, they do have their own PLC, those two, to focus more on the really, really early childhood issues. Part of what they do is they design common formative assessments, so that when the kindergarten goes to teach a unit on quantities of 5 is one that they just completed. They are all doing a common pre-assessment so that they know where their kids are at, both as individual teachers and as grade level, so they can see what do our kids already know, who are the kids who are struggling, are going to need some pretty intense instruction. And then they all do they also do a common formative assessment towards the end, so they can see how effective was the teaching. Now, 5 years ago, you might have if you had a group of teachers teaching the same unit, which you probably wouldn't, they wouldn't all be using the same assessments. So you might say, teacher A, oh, my kids did great, teacher B, my kids did great, teacher C, but there was no continuity of assessment. So one of the things that they're working on fastidiously is creating those common formative assessments. And then I collect that data so I can see how kids are doing in each of the classrooms and across the grade level. And then I put it all together and I return it to them so I get it individually and I give it back to them as a team so that they can see how it's all working.
The middle school is also PLCs. It's core driven. So there's a language arts PLC, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, as well as on grade. So Katie and Allison and Lori get together to talk about their language arts there as well. So it's powerful
like
stuff.
A tic-tac-toe board where you're part of this PLC and this PLC.
It's awesome. I was just in it 2 weeks ago, or last week actually. The language arts one. It was phenomenal discussion. Absolutely phenomenal discussion.
Can I ask just a system question of it? It sounds like a really engaging way to do work as a professional. And it also sounds like there's a burden in adding curriculum construction to that work. And so my systems question is, are our educators finding that to be more burden than value added in terms of their input to curriculum, or is there money we should be spending for curriculum writing, or we as a region should be advocating for somebody and the resources to do that, particularly as we're coming up on budget time? So is the voice worth the time it takes from an educator standpoint? And I don't know if I can fairly ask that of these guys who are here, or if
So what I'd
anybody
like
can
to do,
speak
and I'll
to it,
just
'cause it's
so I can
a
get
system
through the
thing.
content, and you'll hear more about it during budget development time. I haven't asked the question across the faculty of 120 licensed staff. My guess is we're probably right down the middle. And that the value added to developing is it's all about professional development. When you get to sit down with your peers and develop curriculum frameworks, you're learning it's a rich experience. The problem is time is finite. There's other folks who I think would be quite happy I don't know about happy, but here's the curriculum. Just tell me what I need to do. So I think that we've got two points of view. But I'd like to address that another time.
Well, let's keep going then.
So that last slide, I'm not going to try to go back because I'll get jammed. I've got apt support. So again, I thought it was important that we show sort of the levels of assessment. Common Core State Standards, that it's NECAP, soon to be SBAC 2015. EMS is piloting that as one of the 20 pilot schools this spring. And we're excited about the opportunity.
In the future, it's also going to be next gen, right? Is that what it's called?
That'll be a year or two out.
It's gonna get
Science.
rolled into,
But
I'm
that'll
sure.
be that's the name of the assessment.
An additional
No,
assessment.
Next Gen Science Standards. That's
Oh.
the name of
Okay.
their
Whole nother
core
group of
science
words.
standard.
Right now, according to the state, we'll be taking the kneecap in science through 2016.
I see. Okay. Gotcha.
Local we have the curriculum that lives under this, and we have a local assessment plan. It's the district plan that is non-negotiable. Here are in the areas of ELA and mathematics. Here are the assessments that you need to use, and those are during those certain times during the year at certain grades. That window opens up.
That's not PLC developed.
No, these are assessments that have changed over time, but that goes into our Vermont Comprehensive Assessment Tool, VCAT. And so when teachers score, those are the data that go in there, okay? Units of study, we've talked about that, and this is what teachers are developing, as principals were alluded to, common formative assessments. That's the ongoing authentic assessment that's happening throughout the year. Summative is, end of unit test, quarterly test, and it's more of a summative at the end of a period of time. Teachers are developing those. And then we have the lessons, and that's just ongoing informal assessments, observation of student work on a real-time, daily basis. So the point of the slide is that it's multi-tiered, and it all is used to determine where the child is at any given time, okay? So I thought, this slide was just sort of, it's one more slide. It's a nested concept of here's a daily lesson plan, which is really about the ongoing review of student work. Units of study, it's school-based common formative assessment. The outer ring is about KUDs, what do you need to know and understand and do. That's under the local curriculum. That's
KUD?
Yep, that's the scope and sequence. That's the
That's the guarantees.
It's the guarantees.
Right.
Every kid needs to know and understand and do these things. That's what lives inside the local curriculum that's aligned with Common Core.
What does KUD stand for?
Know, understand, and do.
Thank you.
CUD works. Yeah. Okay. So
It's gotta be
the next several slides, again, is introducing a concept to the board that is not new to some of us in Essex Town, but we sort of at the beginning stages of coming to appreciate the value of what's called a data wall or an assessment wall. And I'll show you an illustration of this. It really provides an ongoing, accurate picture of where kids are across the grade level and across the school district, based on the proficiencies of 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 being, below the standard, 4 being exceeding it. And you're familiar with that scoring guide or that rubric. It's used to determine the effectiveness of our services and supports. And so when we look at kids in an illustration, we can see who's underperforming, who's achieving, who's more higher achievers, and where the services, how are we lining up those services to affect positive growth in all students. It provides appropriate educational opportunities for all students, so it's not just looking at kids with disabilities who are tangled up, it's looking at all students at one glance. And it's a rich experience to go through in terms of identifying, and when we look at groups of performing kids, where's the professional development? And that needs to touch, the lives of those underperformers and the kids who are exceeding the standard. It allows us to have a more real-time conversation about that. With a data wall, we're monitoring the district. If EMS were to come online at some point, when it does, it allows us to look at the district as a whole, clearly the school level, grade level, classroom, and subgroups, those kids who are entitled to services through special education or 504 ELL, but allows us to look, again, at all students in a real holistic way. The next slide will show you what that representation looks like. Each student in each grade level is on a card without mentioning the name. The initials are there. And there's a code that tracks demographics for kids who have, again, entitlement services. Gender is identified, and all of that information is on one card. With, again, in the wall itself is represented like this. Here's one of our colleagues at the elementary school. So the kids and this is in reading, okay? And so over the right now it's just 1 and 2 is up on the wall, Peter. This was 2 weeks ago.
Second grade. The
Second
next
grade
batch down is first grade.
First grade.
And we just finished our kindergarten assessment window, so we'll be having a needs assessment where kindergarten will go up next.
So underperforming, 2 almost there, at the standard, above the standard. So Teachers, again, we're in our beginning stages of this.
Oh, so this is, so 1 through 4 proficiency, and then each card represents a student. And again, the green and the pink is?
Second grade, first grade.
Gotcha.
So this is the first semester. We're into mid-October, so we've already got a visual representation where our kiddos are. And as students progress in in ELA or mathematics, obviously the goal is to move those kids to the right.
Right.
But we do that en masse after those assessment periods are completed.
And they're the local assessments that are moving this data and informing.
Local
instruction.
assessment and formative
The
assessment.
stuff
So
that's happening in their
the
classroom.
local assessment plan, which is the district plan, is one piece of that. But there's also formative data and conversations, which I'll talk about in a moment, that teachers have when they're looking at the wall together.
Could you define formative assessment?
Ongoing assessment that relates directly to what's being taught.
Okay.
So here's our friends at, I'm sorry, Diane, she's pointing over to those fours somehow. This is, we have Jen Button in the background. That was Bree Buzzle, by the way. And this is our friend Diane. Again, in front of the wall, there's 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and achievement levels of 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, this is just reading. This is just a reading wall right now.
So do you have a math wall,
Not
a
yet.
science wall, and a
Not
reading
yet.
wall?
No,
I mean, you're
we're-
going to cover the entire school.
I know. Yeah. This is, but we're going to grow this. Yeah.
So reading is the focus for the first round of data
but it's-
walls.
Yeah.
With
Math
our
will be
3rd
added.
grade, which is the green slide,
Yep.
we triangulated 5 pieces of data to come up with that.
Wow, okay.
And Peter, your data for grades 1 and 2?
Is based on DRAs, the more formative assessment as well, some screeners that we did. So it's probably
So it's a
3
combination of assessments that go into the one
Yes.
placement of that card
Yes.
on the chart.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's impressive.
I'm going to keep flipping, okay?
Okay, yeah.
I know, I'm impressing you guys.
Should've known.
What's
So-
the sound effects?
I know, I think
Ask
I'm
them to
carried
go
away.
back.
So I'm going to whip through
Yeah,
these
right.
bullets pretty
Put it
quickly.
all in
Track student
perspective.
progress. That's the impetus behind a data wall. It's showing student progress with all kids in the building, and it's a big visual illustration of that. Again, it shows the big picture, not just one little piece of data. Reading is made up, as we've talked about over the last couple of months, of many different things. And so that data point shows the composite score of a reader. And within that lives their performance in fluency and vocabulary and comprehension and phonemic awareness and phonics. So that score incorporates all of that. So it's the big picture of the whole kid. You get to discover trends. So when you look at the whole building, you can see those groups of kids and subgroups of kids, and you can see where those trends, if we still have 14 kids in the first column after the second semester, we know that there's something there we need to be paying attention to. Provides transparency. It's an open conversation. It's not one teacher, one principal sitting at the table looking at their data. It's the whole building, which really strengthens this sense of interdependence, and we're a team to affect the learning of all kids. It predicts success on high stakes. The statewide assessment, we've talked about that before. Our local assessment, if we have a difference between local and statewide, we've got a problem. So as well as we do here is going to predict how well, it should predict how well we do on statewide assessment. What we're most excited about is the conversation that happens in front of the wall. Because it isn't just about taking the data from VCAT and putting it on the wall. It's the conversation that you saw a little bit of with Diane and Jen there, having a conversation about what are we seeing together. Why do we still have these 14 kids in column 1, for example, and it engages teachers in a conversation about what their practice is and what might be going on in their classroom. So it's a very collaborative, once it's grown, it'll become a real collaborative process. Again, it determines the level of instruction, intervention, and enrichment opportunities for students. It demands and supports the use of formative assessment. So it's not, again, just transferring local assessment. It requires us to use the assessments we're using at the classroom and team level to factor in. I mean, I've been in conversations where we've looked at the data, but with teachers talking, not here, not experiencing this here, that they'll change a kid's placement based on the conversation that teachers are having about the data that they're looking at. provides a framework for discussion about best practice and grouping strategies. It puts the focus on grade levels around whole school improvement in addition to individual classrooms and students. So it really is, again, a systems approach to looking at change. And finally, it should generate the differentiation of program for kids who are below, at, or above the standard. So we believe there's a lot of benefit inherent in the model. What criteria to use, again, reading is something that we're all interested in. We use local and school-based assessments, formal and informal assessments, teacher observations, student work, and student state assessment results. So all of those data are looked at in their entirety. It's just not one set. And again, because this conversation has come up, I just want to amplify that all these 5 areas are assessed and factored into our overall assessment of a student's ability. These data is the one chart. I did my job tonight, and I brought you guys a copy. What I wanted to do this year was to show our second graders last year in the fall of 2012 and where they are a year later, same cohort of kids in 2013, same with our 5th graders last year, and then when they entered 6th grade this year. And we don't have 9th grade here, but here's where our kids were in 8th grade. What we feel is a beautiful thing is this. You can see the movement, and when they leave 8th grade, 92% of our kids are out above the standard. Keep in mind that this is a year's growth. They're not being assessed this fall as 3rd graders on what they were assessed last year. It's a year later, so the standard has gone up.
Wait, so just so I'm clear about what this chart is showing, this is looking at all 4 of the proficiency levels on the left.
Yeah.
And then by grade, how those percentages of proficiency change.
Yeah. So it's 66%. We're in the 3-4 range in 2nd grade.
Yeah.
In the fall, and now they're here at Founders.
Yeah.
And it's still 66%. Now some kids dropped. This number went down, but it's still at or above the standard of 66%.
Right.
What we like to see is that we have more students in 3rd grade at level 2 than we did as 2nd graders.
Okay.
So there's growth there.
I see.
Fewer kids in level 1.
Right. So
Okay.
you want to see a higher percentage in the 3s and 4s and 2s as you go through.
And these are all children. Kids with low SES, students with disabilities, with the exception of those with a real extraordinary need. So this is all students.
Is everybody? Okay.
Yeah. In the 5th grade, not a lot of change from 5 to 6, although this is a year, the standards have gone up because it's the next year. Okay, so we're there, we're still good numbers, and then of course we get to 8th grade 2 years later from 5th grade. And
So that's pretty dramatic. I mean, if you look at 6, right, and the percentage in 2 and 1, and then where they end up in 8, that's a pretty significant shift to
And
go
that-
for, right?
That panned out this year too, because in the last, I'm sorry, I'm talking out of turn.
Go ahead. I recognize you.
I just added 6th grade to my data wall because my 5th grade teachers wanted to see where their kids were. And so with BCAT, the wonderful thing is principals have access to the kids they had last year. And when I put it up there, it's amazing how well the 6th graders were doing.
so this is where we're going in the future. We're following cohorts of kids year to year, using these are from data. This is from an assessment. This wasn't teachers decided if it's a 4, 3, 2, 1. These are assessment data assessments that we're taking in specific grade levels based on the district assessment plan. But we're using formative assessment to factor into the conversation. Okay. Yeah. Last slide is it's not unlike what you saw in the last ENDS report. Number one is we recognize the importance of not just parent communication but parent involvement, especially for those underperforming kids. It's just absolutely imperative that we have moms and dads or guardians be part of a plan and how they can support good literacy at home. We believe as a district that the best instruction is the first instruction. And so our approach to professional development is more embedded today, really supporting good first instruction and classroom instruction so that kids don't have to at all, go down the hall to receive services. That may be a need within the continuum of supports, but we believe that we need to support our primary educators as best we can so they can be the first ones delivering that. We're using data more and more. That said, it is a humanistic approach. It's not all about the numbers. We have to recognize that there are other parts of what we do that are not just based on the numbers, and it's about effective leadership. It's about PLCs and supporting the work of each other and making sure we've got a good climate for the work in the building. We have to be monitoring. Rich Reed, Dan talked about this a lot in his report. We have to have systems in place that we're monitoring students on a regular basis. It's not at the end of the semester or at the end of the school year. We have to be making sure that we're checking in with real good data to determine whether or not it's working. Student learning plans, it could be a 504 plan, it could be an IEP, it could be Act 157, it could be in the future personal learning plans as promulgated by new state law. But we have to focus on that student-centered learning, and sometimes plans allow us to be more exacting on that. And then finally, as part of our continuum, again, is making sure that if we're not able to do that in a regular classroom, making sure we've got targeted instruction that's done thoughtfully at different times of the day. Kevin's, Peter, and Joyce's attempts at trying to massage the schedule to allow intervention blocks, enrichment blocks, as a way to get at that piece. Concludes my whirlwind. I also wanted to, if you have questions, we've got 5 people from the leadership team here who are right up to speed on this stuff. So.
David, shoot.
Looking at the data wall, I'm going to pick on category 2. Are students within category 2, for talking purposes, alphabetical, just stuck up there? Or do you have a further sub breakdown, 2 minus, full 2, and 2 plus?
Mine is actually down to the 100th place. So a 2 could be a 2.00, could be a 2.78, could be a 2.99.
So you
It's
can
really,
monitor.
because I use so many pieces of data, and when you see it on the wall,
It's like a number line.
you start right from the beginning, like a number line.
Too, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, see the way they're sort of.
Okay.
Peter, you want to?
We also, it's the same thing. What we do is we put ours, we have the sort of large group within the 2s, the 3s, the 1s, the 2s, and 3s. Then we organize what we call cusp, which are the kids who are, they're the 2s who are really, they're just teetering at the 3 when you look at all of the data and you put all of the data together. The 1s, cusp 1s, so they sit right along, actually physically on the wall, they sit right at the edge of 1 and 2, the edge of 2 and 3, the edge of 3 and 4.
Wow.
So that.
By that statement, am I assuming that being a weekly or a monthly review of that data, you would then move students from a 2 to a 3
Yep.
or?
What we're talking about now, we've just begun the conversation, is how do we build more routine data wall conversations into our days. In the past, what we've done when we started doing them a few years back, it was strictly around the assessment window times. But what we're finding is the discussion that goes on about the kids and about the strategies needed to move those kids is too valuable to leave at a 3-time-a-year event. So what we're looking at now is how do we build in data wall discussion time to really fold in all of that formative assessment, and then use the data, then use the assessment windows to double check our assumptions. So are we correct? Does our local assessment data back up where we're putting kids on the wall,
So
as opposed to simply determining where we put them?
Right.
Thank you.
this blows me away, actually. And for me, I'm trying to think about this in terms of the policy that we're still monitoring in this moment. And from a systems perspective, this gives me much more insight than I've ever had into what's going on in each building among PLCs. I mean, this is, having been here, for 5 or 6 years now on this board, I have never seen anything like this
Well,
happening
you had
in our
some really
schools.
good questions 2 weeks ago, and what I was trying to glean some themes. One of them was we need more information about sort of the curriculum assessment. How does it all work
Yeah.
together? So,
It was very helpful for me in helping round out my understanding of where we are with this ends monitoring report. So this has been very helpful. And to see the level of detail, and scrutiny is the wrong word, but attention that goes into the individual, but then also the grade and or the subject area or what have you. This to me is pretty revolutionary for Essex Town, I think.
well, I like that thinking. It's exciting as a.
And maybe I just didn't know that
I
this
use
kind
the
of thing
word
was
exciting.
happening.
It is exciting work, and it is future oriented. I mean, Dan asked the question about report cards. Kevin and his faculty, and as a district, the report card has to change. It should have changed
Right.
a while back, and EMS currently is not quote unquote standards based, and so this really is going to challenge our thinking about how do you report progress, and it has to be related to the standards that we're teaching to,
Right.
and so the form and the function definitely need to change.
It's impressive.
She's jumping out of her chair again.
Oh, yes.
You think I'd never been to a board meeting before. What I will tell, a couple of things. First of all, even the subgroups are represented there. There's little dots on the cards for kids or SES or kids on IEPs or kids who've had Title I services. The second thing is teachers know how to analyze data. They've known how to analyze data for years. However, it wasn't until they saw it on the wall that they themselves could see the big picture. And so that's the realization that you have from
Hence
those
our
teachers
friend
there.
I love it. Yeah, interesting. So it helps. It helps across the faculty then to help them be thinking bigger picture.
It gives us an idea of how does grade level doing?
Yeah.
How is each individual kid doing? And how is our school as a whole doing?
Mhm.
What is the percentage? I mean, you can't see the little stars above actually tell how many cards are in each pocket. Peter used his vertically to get all the kids on.
Right.
I overlapped my cards.
Oh,
Not
I see.
for-
So there's actually like 3 or 4 cards
Oh my God, yeah.
in one hole
Well,
there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was an educator who works here who approached me a couple of weeks ago and said that the concept of a wall had never seen such a strong third grade before. So it speaks to the hard work at the elementary school,
Right.
but also they see third grade.
Of the 133 third graders,
It's just
73
not a
of them are in
caseload
level
of children
3.
or a
Yeah.
classroom of kids. It's all of the kids. And so I thought that was a pretty poignant statement.
Peter, your picture of the elementary one didn't have kindergarten. Do you have kindergarten on now, or is it in progress?
The assessment window for kindergarten just closed.
Okay.
So when we'll compile all that data, we have the cards ready to go.
In process.
What we do is we do what are called needs assessment, where myself, Title I folks, special educator for that grade level, sit with every single teacher at that grade level and go through every single student, looking at all of the assessment data and figuring out where on the wall those kids are going to go, and then we code them, according to their according to the demographics as we put them up there. So I think we have kindergarten scheduled. I'm not sure when though for the needs assessment.
Will pre-K ever be on something like that? Is that
I
possible?
hope they stay in the sandbox, actually. Not be on a wall.
We tape the kids to the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can
Jessica.
talk about that. Right now, so pre-K is pre-K in Peters building, but it's also, we have 11 pre-K partners spread out through Chittenden County. So, and some of them we fund and some of them we don't.
Right.
So those are the slots we're increasing every year, but any kid that we fund and any place that we fund, and I'd say fund, it's really a tuition reduction.
Right.
But they're responsible for submitting to us and the state data, which is Teaching Strategies Gold. And that is a huge bank of information, which is like, I don't even know how many objectives, but everything's broken down into these little component parts. and it's based on developmental categories and ages, the early childhood outcomes, and so anyway, we have that data. You know, so the idea is as we add slots and as we add kids, we could do the same thing. And I mean, ideally, what I would like to do, say, it's probably 7 or 10, I don't know how long, but is to look at this in the same way you would look at a classroom in a building in a district, to look at where those places with pre-K, what professional development do they need, where are they housed, what's their environment, and then how can we work together as districts. So if we have, say, Essex Junction and Essex Town, a lot of kids in the same place, how could we combine to provide PD to that place since they're serving all of our kids?
I would bet you $1 that given the emphasis Jessica and I are attending Governor Shumlin's early education summit tomorrow in Montpelier, I bet you $1 that with an emphasis, renewed emphasis, because Ray McNulty, former commissioner, was a big leader in the area of early education, there's going to be some accountability system. I mean, I just guarantee it. And right now we look at our readiness data for kindergarten as an indicator. And I mean, I'm really concerned that we don't get too wild about, you know, monitoring 4-year-olds.
It was exciting to learn, though, at the conference this past week that the state of Vermont has applied for race to the top funding tied to early education, without some of the strings that made the other options seem less
and the concern is that over $30 million, we're not prepared to move the system. So, you know, so it'll be, that's why we're going to sort of hear more about, you know, what the vision is.
Right.
Well, and if they should get that money is targeted for exactly that, quality monitoring, essentially, or student progress.
Right.
That is, I think, what that Race to the Top money is about. We had a chance to hear a presentation from them at the meeting in Montpelier of the full Vermont School Boards Association board. So,
I want to, it's 9:15, and I am determined that we will call the question on this monitoring report tonight.
Actually, I guess can we just say goodbye to these guys?
no, I have a question first.
Oh. Yeah, so I wanted to give board members an opportunity to ask any last questions that might.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
So now's the time for questions, quickly.
So, I'm feeling like Kevin's very left out in this data wall conversation. So I just, not to put anybody on the spot, but if it's the right thing to do and how to best look at it, is it not age appropriate or building appropriate, or is it coming? Is it?
It's a new concept for us at the middle school. It's we have been talking about it with math, and particularly just this last week with Karen Nee, who's our PLC leader, about how we can make that look. With the language arts, we use a lot of formative assessments that the teachers are developing, so I'm not certain how that would look on there, so we'd have to come up with how that would fit for us. But the one thing I did want to say is, and Mark already took that slide down, is at the end of 8th grade, it's 92%. And that's not 7th to 8th grade teachers that do that. It's K through 8th grade teachers that do that. So as much as it looks like there's all these gains and all of a sudden there's this wild gain at the end, that's not the case. The case is it takes the work that's happening down in Peter's building all the way up so that by the time they're up there, it all clicks. And it's amazing stuff.
There was a more of a need, Kim, at K-5. Getting kids learning how to read early is obviously our biggest goal, and it's not to suggest that it wouldn't have utility at the middle school, but
absolutely.
I think it's something we'll grow, but we really wanted to start it as actually thanks to the leadership of principals to get things going, started here.
Well, it makes sense, I guess, to start K up, in terms of priority.
And I don't want to diminish that great success, and I think that those are awesome numbers to look at. The standard-based proficiency in every category in the middle school, in 8th grade, dropped from fall to spring. So I guess that, and just understanding whether or not, if it's in fact best practice, is it coming? If it's not age appropriate for the building, is it, what else are we doing to sort of address that stuck out pretty dominantly in that particular chart to me. So just
there's lots
curious.
of different excuses that we can come up with, but the bottom line is they dropped. So we need to figure out what it is that happened.
And whether data wall or whatever the tools
Right.
that you guys use to do it,
Right.
if that's on everybody's radar, then that makes sense.
Other questions about the monitoring report? Because I would like for us to have a vote on accepting the monitoring report or not before we adjourn for this evening.
This is accepting the monitoring report as indicating where compliance is happening or non-compliance is happening.
It's accepting
It's not accepting compliance, it's accepting the monitoring report that indicates.
If I were to make a motion, and I might just do that.
Because you want to get out of here, yes.
No,
I know.
I think the question that I might call is to accept the monitoring report as presented.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, well, now that we have a motion on the table
Can we
and a
have a
second,
conversation?
let's have some more discussion.
Okay.
Final questions, and can we let other folks go, or do you think that Mark is?
I'll stick
I think
with
so.
you.
It's just a couple
You
of
can't
questions
leave,
that were
sorry. I'm
those.
with
Yeah, you don't get to
I'm
leave.
with you.
And do you want me to just knock them out?
That'd be great.
Okay. So on relevance and connections, we talk about family and community members. Information that would be great evidence or data in there, particularly in light of having changed conferences, would be conference participation, and are we continuing to make connections with families in various avenues in the absence of as many days as we've previously had. So that would be evidence or data that would be beneficial there. It's not a deal breaker for me in terms
Right,
of.
you're just making recommendations.
I'm saying that would be an indicator I'd like to see in the future in that category. The music numbers which we got would be either a great addendum or under innovation and creativity, any other areas that we're using the arts and have a number of occasions we've presented in the community or music things we've done, or those would be, again, indicators, data that I could see being beneficial under those categories. The bullying data under teaching and learning environment showed up, and that was great. We reference sort of highlighting the policy a little bit around that, and so either procedure as addendum or reference to where it shows up in a parent handbook, or the numbers were great, and then we're indicating that we're doing some changes there and how that might impact our numbers in the future. So again, that's a great place in my mind for that mandatory bullying policy to be referenced specifically so that we can knock off 2 monitorings in one report, because I think it fits well under this policy. And I think this is awesome and would love to see it as an addendum or whatever other. I don't know if we can do that as a friendly amendment, or I don't even know, but your presentation last time too, Mark, was packed with great data. And so to know that when we're approving it, it's in the context of the information you've provided in presentation, I think even as a matter of practice, if we're able to do that on every monitoring report that you bring to us, that your presentation materials become an addendum to it or an appendix?
I second that idea. I mean, I think that we've gotten so much information, and this goes back to my only concern about the interpretation. So much information has been presented to this board over the course of 2 meetings now. I would love to have it all zipped up in one packet so that as we move forward, we can reference, well, what did we do last time? What were some of the indicators that we looked at? And go back to that document before we monitor this policy next time, right? It'd be great to go back and say, well, what did we do last time, and what worked, what didn't work? I remember Kim said she wanted to see more about this data, or that would be a good indicator. So much good information, but again, it's just a matter of putting all those documents together in one packet, I really think.
I just put mine together.
There you go. Cool. There it is.
I'll just put it all together.
My only thought of I love this growth over time slide, because it really does. Nothing makes things stand out more, and the parent in me and the person who's interested in details makes me fascinated. What the heck are you guys doing in 8th grade to hit 92%? Oh my God! The policy governance board member says doesn't matter. It's there. I don't care what you're doing. It's there. But it makes it stand out even more that when we look at the grade 2, 3 data, we're like, wow, it's 30. Don't check me on the math here. 35, 32%, whatever it is, are under the standard. That's where it makes me think, geez, that's the area we need to know more about what's going on. And then we go to. the report.
Most, if not all, of our meeting tonight was talking about what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, this was loaded with
Yeah.
means
Like
discussion
how
as a
they're-
way to get at, and in the future, as I've said, is to have more opportunities to visit with our teacher colleagues. Thank you, Jessica.
Thanks, Jeff.
And
Staying.
Betsy and others who can talk about the work that's happening.
Right.
Because if we are going to rely on teachers at times to talk about it, then I think there's got to be a broader spectrum of opinions
Right.
at the table.
Yeah.
And so, so if it still didn't hit the mark, that's
But
good feedback. But
it-
again, we also don't want to spend all 2 hours talking about means. You know?
Well, it's
Yeah.
if there's a place. Yeah, I don't want to talk about means. Honestly, I don't want to talk about
Well, it
means.
sounds like you do, though.
Because, well, like I say, part of me does. The board member in me says we're not supposed to. Therefore, the only thing I can ask about is data. The only piece of data we have in grade 2, 3 says, that's where we're weak.
But I saw what they were doing, Dan. What I saw is how they're sort of taking the information we have,
But what
And-
information?
the triangulated data to come up with where those kids fall on that wall.
That's
and
what
then
I
what
wanna
they
see.
do. We just saw it.
No,
I
I
don't-
mean, what are the assessments that are being done?
DRA, I
That's a
actually
level
heard
But
Peter
see,
listen
that's,
to you.
not
that,
sure.
like, and
I
I
can
just think
think
as
of
a
my-
board member, we're not necessarily, I don't, I know what DRAs are, but I wouldn't know how to assess that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think though, by looking at, okay, where are these kids falling, what are we doing, and where are they ending up, I think that's what we're here to monitor. Not necessarily having to understand every single piece of assessment or knowing every piece of data that went into where they're placed.
I think the most powerful thing, I agree with you. I think the most powerful thing I saw tonight, Dan, is that we saw those cards on that wall were not just one assessment.
Right.
It was a combination of a lot of assessments that went into that student being placed on that wall.
Mhm.
And to me, that's the powerful message that's what I need to see as a board member. And it's even probably a little too much for a board member to see. But to go below that and to go into even more detail would not be helpful for me as a
Okay.
board member to determine whether or not Mark and his team have the evidence to support that they're in compliance or not in
And
compliance.
I might argue that while it may seem like too much, Brendan, I don't think it is, given that we have had issues with we're in corrective action, whatever we're called, with our kids at the elementary school. I think it's very appropriate to understand where we're not compliant, what's being done to come into compliance. You know, maybe if we were all grades were at 90% or whatever, we'd be like, okay,
I wouldn't
terrific.
care.
But nonetheless, I think from a system standpoint, sort of understanding how you guys do your work to keep students progressing is meaningful in knowing how you're addressing areas where we either may not be proficient on occasion or how you're looking to get the absolute best out of all kids.
Yeah, see, I
And
don't-
that may be a
I
matter
guess
of
I
a 3
don't-
or
I-
a 4 or a 2,
Yeah,
but
I guess I'm confused on
I think
again,
that's
not to
great
take your
data.
guys' time, is what you heard tonight is what we're doing.
right.
The
And
strategies
so-
I've identified
So I guess
is what we're doing. I mean, I don't know how much, you want
That's
to come
what I
visit,
think
you know, I
was
mean, I don't.
meaningful
Oh,
in
this
the
was
work.
yeah.
No, I wasn't suggesting there was more that we needed to see.
Okay.
I
This
was
is
suggesting
very
that satisfied that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank
And
you.
that was, no,
Good.
I'm sorry, Mark, to confuse that. I was just letting Brendan know that he had suggested maybe it was too much, that it was satisfying for him and maybe it was even too much for the context of, policy governance or whatever. I think it's very illuminating to the good work that's happening around student progress, wherever a student lie on that continuum, and that it's not a single kneecap score. And so I found it both informative and really appropriate, even in the context of policy discussion,
Yeah.
about the work that we're doing, especially since we happen to be on whatever our plan is that we're
Yeah,
on.
and I would agree.
Sorry.
And I agree
Don't mean to be
with
flip
you.
about that.
I agree with you that for me, this was reassuring
Very much so.
to be able to see the kind of conversations that are happening around kids and around the kids that are struggling or tangled up in particular areas. So, to me, this represents a huge leap, I think, in terms of our understanding and maybe even on the ground of what's happening and how kids are being looked at, not just from their grade level, but from a school and a district level. It's really encouraging.
I would bet Diane Arthur was pointing at the forest because she was excited to figure out how to do more for those kids
Yeah, right.
too. I am not kidding you. I had the good fortune of some time in her classroom, and I know that her excitement was about them being there, but about how she even challenges them further.
Right.
And that's, what you see
Mhm.
in that picture to me, and Jen, vigilantly working it with how you move kids, and
Yep.
that's really powerful stuff, so I'm very grateful for the glimpse at
Good, I'm glad
these
it
professionals at work.
So maybe instead of saying more data, it's why. Maybe that's the question. Why is this data this way? Why are we at 33% ones and twos after 3 years of teaching in our district? They're still at 33%. And after 9 years, they're at, 6%.
Maybe
or
we'll know more
below
when
that.
we see more of a preschool picture. Or maybe, kids come in. I think of my kid's situation coming into kindergarten with such vast extremes.
Yeah.
That must be the hardest
Could be
grade
cohort
for
related.
any teacher to come upon.
Yeah.
Not in an excuse fashion, but boy, they're learning so much. Whether it's how to go to the bathrooms by themselves and wash their hands, or
Well, each cohort of kids comes in with a
Yeah.
different set of challenges and a different spectrum of experience and
Yeah,
capability and
that's
ability.
what makes the work exciting. That again, it's I don't at all take that as judgment as much as it is. We'd love to know why.
Yeah.
And I think we know why, and in some instances, others we don't. But it's the work that we do is to try to get kids to grow. And I think, as evidenced by that table, when they say goodbye and they walk across the floor, they're at 90% at or above. And so, could we have accelerated that earlier group of kids faster? I don't know, but I also think we have to be careful not to be too aggressive with that too, because they're little kids, and so there's.
Right.
But it's a good question.
Yeah.
Why? And we're always trying to figure that out.
So, what other questions need to be asked and answered before we call this question to a vote?
I got a little bit of a problem.
Okay, David?
This is a monitoring report, superintendent's view on stuff. He presented the information. I am sure that if we asked for a 6-hour presentation to justify everything in that report, he could come up with it.
And we're bordering on 5.
But in my
Just so
estimation,
you all know.
we want to know what time it is. We don't care how the watch is built.
Mhm.
And I think that we're asking the question, how is the watch built?
Okay, thank you, David.
Because I think that how the watch is built and whether it keeps time, that's the problem with those people, not us.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments or feedback before I call the question?
Can we make this an addendum?
Yeah,
Is that
I
okay
friendly
now?
amendment would. I'd love to see all of this data wrapped up in a packet. So
Do we
friendly
wanna do
amendment
that,
would
or
be.
do we want to take this as suggestions potentially for future reports?
Well, we have it though, David. I guess is my only thought that if we have it.
Well, we
and-
could ask for more information, have him come
No,
back to
no.
the next meeting too.
No,
I
no,
don't
it's
want
not
any
about
more.
more.
I don't want more information. I want to put this with this. If there's anything else, Mark, from the first meeting.
Does that mean that next time
was-
around we have to have that same
No,
information
I'm just asking if we
presented
can
again?
do, I'm asking if we can do a friendly amendment or whatever it's called when we do it to our own monitoring reports.
We're asking how the watch is built here.
No, Dave. What she's
I'm really
asking
not.
is, can we take all the information that's been presented over these 2
And
meetings
put
and
it
put them
together.
together?
I can do that.
That would be
As
great.
long as the minutes reflect that.
Thank you.
Please let the minutes show that we asked for all of the data that's been presented over these past 2 meetings to be put together in one packet.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, I'm just thinking, I think if I understand Dave right, it's just that, are we, in the future, is that what we're asking for, is the compilation of what we've been presented in the last 5 hours? And that's just what I'm just
Yep.
asking, so I make sure that I understand.
I
If
guess-
that's what we're asking for, I'm withdrawing my second, and somebody else can provide one.
Well, what I think we're after as a board is, what did we do last time? So that as we begin to talk about the next monitoring report of these policies, we can just remember what was presented, because our memories get a little foggy over the years.
For 5 hours.
We're
whatever.
not necessarily demanding this be
Right.
part of the
Yeah,
next
yeah,
one.
that's
No,
No,
not
no,
at
no,
all.
no,
No,
no.
just that I think the precedent would be if there's additional information provided in the presentation, that it be an addendum to the monitoring
Yeah.
document,
Yep.
so that it's not reliant on minutes.
Yeah,
But
you didn't
rather-
ask for this presentation. I gave it to you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just
And
trying
it-
to think about what would be helpful.
Well,
And I
and-
think it's just great practice if there's
Yeah.
color commentary that is already been compiled for your presentation. It seems great that it voted.
Great. So I will call the question then. The question on the table, which has been seconded by David, unless you withdraw.
I'm going to withdraw my
I'll second it.
All right, so Kim seconds it. We have a first and a second. You got that on the minutes?
This is going to require you watching RETN to get this.
Sorry, David withdrew his
Thank
second,
goodness.
so Kim seconded it again. So all those in favor of approving the monitoring report, accepting the monitoring report as presented, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
One opposed. Any abstentions?
Wait a minute. I'm going to be gracious and I'm going to vote aye.
So the motion passes 4-1. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your feedback. Thanks for coming tonight, everybody.
Thanks,
you guys
everybody.
very
Really
much.
appreciate
Having you here.
Really appreciate your time. I know there's a baseball game waiting, so. Huh? It's 1-1?
What inning?
Okay.
What inning is it?
What?
Look for me. I'll look for you.
Have you got an update
You
on
know,
the
I
ball
literally
game
went to
for us?
bed last night saying I'm not going to stay up for it, but yeah, I kept hearing my husband
Bottom of the fifth,
Bottom of the
1-1.
screaming down the hall.
All
Could be
right.
another nail biter.
Okay.
All right.
Come on, Lester.
Good thing I don't.
So the
good thing
last
I'm
last item on the
Yankees fan.
agenda.
For me.
Last item
Okay.
on the agenda is 3 questions. Did we follow our code of conduct?
Thank you.
What is on the calendar, the board calendar, and future agenda items? Does anyone happen to have the board work calendar? Obviously,
Pull up the most recent because I seem to have like a
I have it.
mocked up
I didn't mean to
printed
do
one.
that.
obviously, we're gonna need to have somebody do 3.2 for our next meeting.
Oops.
Accountability of the superintendent. Would love to have a volunteer for that monitoring report.
Does that monitor? Is that okay?
Who did it last time?
Let's
Do we
see
know?
if we can tell who did it. Oh, I
Kim
did.
Gleason did it.
Oh, no, in
that was
2011.
well, geez,
Oh.
it's been a while since
My
you've
guess
done
would
one.
be I did not do it last time.
Who did it say who did it in 2012?
I don't have it, but I bet it's
Oh.
on our. I just didn't put it in here.
Okay,
It must be
I
on
thought
the
that
website.
I thought that yellow sheet
Oh
behind
no,
it
it's
was it.
2010.
Oh my
I
goodness.
filed to the.
Oh, you filed that direction.
I
I
filed
filed the
that
other
direction
way.
so that I can, when I flip it, see who did it.
Well, I could really confuse you by giving mine back.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
All right, so
good.
November 11th is our next meeting,
3.3.
and
Oh, no,
so FY15. So, Mark, is that true that we're going to look at budget planning assumptions at the next meeting?
Yep, it's under 2.3 is
Okay.
is the executive limitation for that work.
And then we'll have science kneecaps, which are sort of a progress. Is that a progress report?
You've seen the data, but yeah, it's a more formal presentation on last spring's science kneecap
Okay.
results in grades 4 and 8.
All right, and so then we need to move 3.2 down to that November 11th meeting.
What about
So-
what about possibly November 18th, just because there's nothing on it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking it might be a
Yeah, no, I like that, actually.
shorter November 11th, and then fill up
Unless
November-
there is a issue that I'm not thinking of with moving that 3.2 to November 18th, I'm inclined to do that because that looks like a pretty open. Does anybody remember whether or not?
Says rollover budget.
That's for the end of November.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are we even going to have a meeting?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to remember. Was
Is
the
that the
18th a
week,
possible?
You know why it was? Because
Thanksgiving?
the following week is the week of Thanksgiving. The
Okay.
following Monday is the week of Thanksgiving.
What you don't have in there planned is linkage with
Yep.
your community. I know that there's at least one. There's the parent group who's interested in engaging with the board. I think, although I don't know if I would. I don't know how you'd want to structure that, but do you want to use any of those times in November to think about how do you engage around budget work?
Yeah, actually, now that I think about that, and I think about the fact that we need to get on this linkage thing if we're going to do it this year.
Yeah.
Let's do 3.2 on the 11th, and one of our agenda items on the 11th should be to discuss linkage for November 18th or thereabouts.
Yeah.
You know,
On the 11th, do you think if we needed to publicize it, we'd need to be out ahead
I'm
of
not
the
looking.
11th?
No, I'm not looking to have a linkage meeting on the 11th.
No, I'm
thi-
sorry,
No,
on the
no, no.
18th. So do we have time if we're only planning on the 11th for a linkage on the 18th?
Yeah, probably not. But the
Well,
the
and
other
then-
the other thing we need to, I think the other thing that we've learned and we need to walk away from is the idea that a linkage meeting has to happen during a board meeting.
That's what I was
Absolutely.
just gonna say, we're not gonna
So-
necessarily draw
Okay.
people here, I think
So
we're
maybe
meant to
it's more of a
brainstorm.
planning meeting
Okay.
for an event that happens in early December.
Yep.
That's on the 11th?
Excuse me?
That's on the 11th?
That'll be that's
The
sort of
18th?
18th, thinking of 18th as maybe a planning, in addition to rollover budget. Maybe the 18th is a conversation about, okay, we're gonna do a linkage in early December. What does that look like? When is it? What is it? That kind of thing.
Why don't we flip it, Brendan? Why don't we do the 11th for the planning, just for the
Okay.
advantage of time and figuring out how we want to do that, and do 3.2 on the 18th.
Okay.
Or it doesn't. Or
I like that. Does anybody not like that?
Would that give enough time?
I think the sooner we
think
start
so?
talking about how and if we're going to link.
Oh,
the
no, no,
better.
I absolutely agree with putting that on the 11th. What
enough
I'm just
time with
saying
the
is the
kneecap.
time for the
Yes.
kneecap, so
We're
that
packing a
was
lot
just,
into
that
that
was just my
meeting.
question, because I don't know.
I know.
We're packing a lot into that meeting.
That's, the
At least it's
conversation
only
of
science
linkage
kneecap,
could
and it's fourth
actually,
and eighth only, right? Isn't science just fourth and eighth, Mark?
You
And-
just moved 3.2 somewhere?
Oh, not doing it.
18th.
No, I'm kidding.
to the 18th. And
Tell me
then
what do you want me to write in here?
the linkage, we're talking about doing the 11th, the discussion on linkage, just on
So
the 11th.
on the 11th. So in that box plan, no, the one above it.
On the 11th,
We'll do that on the 11th.
to allow,
And you can leave it for the 18th as well, because
Yeah.
we'll probably continue the conversation.
okay.
So the idea is that we'll spend the next two meetings talking about what the linkage will look like, and we'll do it in early December. Is that a general time frame or plan
Sounds
that
good.
sounds good to people?
Yep.
So
Okay.
is the only thing on the next meeting, future agenda, discuss linkage?
No.
No,
No,
we've
there's
got
a ton of
still,
stuff.
This regularly scheduled stuff.
Regularly
Yeah.
scheduled stuff, and then
We don't want to spend 2 hours talking about it.
And so at the next meeting, I can assign 3.2.
if I didn't do the last one, I will do it.
Okay, so you'll look at that?
Yes.
Okay.
But you probably didn't if you did 2011.
I don't think I did it because I did 2011. Unless anybody else is dying to do it, I'm happy.
I
to
may
take
have done it last time, but I can't remember.
Is anybody else dying to take
I
it?
think I heard Rachel volunteer.
Wait a minute.
well, I just don't even know what it looks like yet. So, part of what I find is challenging is I don't have the history of the past year
Yeah. The
to
full
know
year.
I
what
would
I'm
agree. That
doing.
makes sense.
That's why
Yeah.
it'd be a good.
You are so off the hook.
That's right.
I'm
But in
gonna
February and
coast through
March,
this year
but in
using
February and
past
March, that's
years.
gonna run.
No
That's
more
gonna wear
excuses.
thin.
You have all of them for April and May. Just saying.
That's right.
Whatever it is we monitor them, they're all you.
All right, so any other future agenda items that the board would like to suggest at this time?
Okay, I just wanted to touch base in regards to how we talked about new members and developing
Orientation.
and then the review. And I
Mhm.
just wanted to see if there was a place we were going to touch back on that at some point.
So wait, I'm trying to understand the question. So you're interested in planning for orientation for new board members, or are you interested in current board member development?
We had talked about that almost being a combination, that it could be also be used as a good review for current board members. And I think originally we had talked about having something kind of at least started and in place around December, but I didn't know if there was a time that we needed to put in there to at least touch base or have at least a copy disseminated between the board members for input. Because I think we had originally talked about maybe having it by December. Because I just, just looking at this, it's like, okay, before you know it, we're going to hit April.
Right.
So are you talking about the idea of putting together some kind of orientation guide?
I don't know exactly what it is, but something.
Okay.
Well, I think my idea personally would be to have some orientation guide for a new member, just even with vocabulary to. Quite honestly,
Right.
vocabulary would be helpful.
Right.
Put KUDs in there, you know.
But having that, but we had discussed that would be something just to have some process in place.
Good point.
And I just thought seeing it
It's the right
cross
time
my
to do it
mind,
when
and
you've
we've
had-
got the calendar up
yeah.
there. That would be nice. To
Yep.
just
No. So that's a good future agenda item, and I'm hearing that we'll want it sooner rather than later.
Well, I'm just thinking before April
Or at
would
least
probably be
put it
good.
in
Before,
there.
before new members join the board. Yeah.
Are we having new members joining this year?
We
Who
have
knows?
at least one person whose term is up this year.
Who's that?
David, is your term up this year as well?
I don't know, but every year we have 2 people that are up for.
Yeah, my term is up this year, and it might be yours.
What's yours? 2 or 3?
I think I was
He's
a
a
3.
Somebody else then.
Oh, it's not you.
Because
Is
there
he
are
a 3?
3-year and 2 2-year terms.
Didn't we have this conversation?
Yeah, we did.
Is it me? It's me and, and somebody else.
I'm pretty sure it's you.
Yeah, just me.
I'm only thinking, it must be two. I think there must be someone else. But you guys did a switcheroo on me. I don't know you.
Well, I
We
I
did a
came in a
switcheroo.
weird way,
Yeah,
so that
I'm
kind
gonna
of.
have Lorna check.
Yeah.
I'll
That'd
have
be
her
great.
call.
That'd be
Yeah.
very helpful.
We just know it's not
Would it
Rachel.
be McQueen? Who would she contact? Town clerk?
Town clerk should have that information.
Well, look in the town report.
Loretta.
It's in the town. It's on
Loretta
the-
has information.
But every year, there's a 2-year and a 3-year position. One of the
Okay.
grads.
I'll check.
All right. If there's unless there's something else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
I beat you to it. I beat you to it.
That's a non-debatable
Okay.
motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you.